This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. He then worked 12 hours a day for 5 weeks to rise from abject poverty back into the middle class. Probably exaggerating, but then also probably not.
Yeah.
By March of 1924, he had earned $16,500 from magazine stories, paid off his debt to Harold Ober, and financed a trip to Europe. Okay, that does kind of rock.
That's pretty bad.
Yes. Yeah. That does rock. The Riviera would provide a stimulating change, cost less than Great Neck, and be more conducive to work. Though he had told Wilson that France made me sick, he sailed there in early May to write The Great Gatsby, which maybe you've heard of.
No, yes, I know something about it.
So a little more about their time in Europe and his sort of drinking and all his craziness. He makes friends with a couple. I think maybe a friend from Princeton, that network, called the Murphys. Let me see here. So they go over. Yeah, let's see here. So they're on the Riviera, and he had very little knowledge of French, which is of course going to be a bit of a problem over in France. Let's see. I want to get this in because, right, their closest friends in Europe, Gerald and Sarah Murphy, were culturally speaking their exact antithesis. They first met this Jamesian couple in Paris in May 1924 through Gerald's sister Esther, who was a Great Neck friend. Gerald's father owned the Fifth Avenue leather goods shop Mark Cross, which was worth $2 million when Gerald inherited it in 1931. 8 years older than Scott, a dandy in dress and manner. He had graduated. You don't hear about dandies anymore.
There's not really dandies anymore.
With dandy erasure. We need to bring that back, man. You can just be a dandy.
Yeah, you could used to be just like a heterosexual man,
a fancy boy, a fancy lad. I knew dandies. We had dandies 20 years ago. All right. If you or anyone you know is a dandy, we want to hear from you. artofdarkpod@gmail.com. I'm quite serious.
Yeah.
Nobody self-identifies as a dandy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he went to Yale, and they're in Europe. Okay. And so the Murphys lived in hedonistic luxury and tended to dissipate their energy in the perfection of trivialities. He would rake the beach, and his wife, Sarah, would, furnish the house. Gerald confessed, "We did nothing notable except enjoy ourselves." So he inherited $2 million, and he's like, "I'm just moving to the Riviera, and this is what I'm doing." All right.
Right on. All right.
And Scott and Zelda would hang out with them, and Scott would act abhorrently. His worst offense, which stretched Gerald's tolerance to the breaking point, led to temporary banishment from the Villa America. It seemed to justify Gerald's angry statement that he really had the most appalling sense of humor, sophomoric and, well, trashy. Feeling that his fellow guests were not paying sufficient attention to him, Scott seemed determined to destroy the formal dinner party. He began throwing Sarah's gold-flecked Venetian wine glasses over the garden wall. He had smashed 3 of them this way before Gerald stopped him. As the party was breaking up, Gerald went to Scott, we're drunk, among the last to leave, and told him that he would not be welcome in their house for 3 weeks. While exiled from their parties, Scott made his presence felt by throwing a can of garbage onto the patio as the Murphys were dining. Scott had another extremely irritating habit, which led the gentle Sarah to censure him. To compensate for his lack of insight and satisfy his curiosity, he would grill friends, even when sober, with tedious and often embarrassing personal questions. Both Donald Stewart and Dos Passos had objected to this habit, which Zelda describes as nagging and asking and third-degreeing his acquaintances. I think he's mining for stories,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
in a dickish way, in a
yeah,
very rude way. Bit seedy.
yeah, yeah.
Sarah, in a frank, exasperated yet sympathetic and well-intentioned letter, also criticized his naive interrogation and used the same word as Gerald to describe his intolerable behavior. You can't expect anyone to like or stand a continual feeling of analysis and sub-analysis and criticism, on the whole unfriendly, such as we have felt for quite a while. It is definitely in the air and quite unpleasant. It certainly distracts from any gathering. We cannot, Gerald and I, at our age and stage in life, be bothered with sophomoric situations like last night. Woof. Right? Sarah later connected the selfishness and insensitivity in Scott's character to a defect in his work and bluntly told him, consideration for other people's feelings, opinions, or even time is completely left out of your makeup. I have always told you you haven't the faintest idea what anybody else but yourself is like. Why, for instance, should you trample on other people's feelings continually with things you permit yourself to say and do? Owing partly to the self-indulgence of drinking too much. Confronted with the harsh truth, Scott was forced to agree that he only knew himself. My characters are all Scott Fitzgerald.
Mm.
Not in Gatsby. So there's a little growing up happening here, you know? Yeah. So going on a little bit, he severely tested the Murphys' patience. He had to prove to himself again and again that they would, no matter how badly he behaved, always forgive him and love him. And this is something he would do. This is something in his character. He'd get drunk. He'd push all your buttons. He'd push you to the absolute limit. And the ones who stayed, that's how he knew, oh, these are my friends. These are, it was an insecurity, I think.
Like an attachment style thing. Complex.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Geez.
Yeah.
That's nowhere in Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People book.
Nope.
Wouldn't suggest it.
Highly avoid. You can have a few bad nights. You can get shit-faced.
Yeah, for
sure. But I mean, you know, you don't want to make it your personality.
Right.
In the 1920s, however, offended by the heavy drinking and bad manners that spoiled many of their fetes, the Murphys did not recognize either Scott's genius or his problems with Zelda. The one we took seriously was Ernest, not Scott Hemingway. Gerald said, I suppose it was because Ernest's work seemed contemporary and new and Scott's didn't. Yet Scott's work, not Ernest's, influenced Gerald. Gerald loved giant eyes and in the late 1920s absorbed a central symbol of The Great Gatsby, the gigantic eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, into his own life and art. Gerald designed a flag for his custom-made schooner Weatherbird with a schematic eye that appeared to blink as it flapped in the wind. All right.
Okay.
So, yeah. Very interesting. So we're coming up on The Great Gatsby. So in the summer of 1924, here's what he would say. Zelda and I sometimes indulge in terrible 4-day rows that always start with a drinking party, but we're still enormously in love and about the only truly happily married people I know. Cope. That's not, we fight for 4 days, but we're in love. We get wasted, then we fight for 4 days, but we're so in love. I'm so romantic, and I'm so in love with my BPD art ho,
and we're really happy. I mean, she tells me we're happy. We're happy.
Sure. Yeah, and our child is across the ocean.
Yeah.
Wait, I mean, it's just
child.
Who? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, in the summer of 1924, when Scott was absorbed in The Great Gatsby and Zelda was bored and restless, they experienced the severest crisis of their crisis-filled marriage, and forced the Murphys to witness the agonizing aftermath of Zelda's infidelity. In June of 1924, you remember earlier when she was writing him all those letters talking about her other beaux and kind of using it as like a power move to force his hand and all the rest? Okay, what's the logical conclusion to that? Well, she's going to cuck him.
Yeah.
In 1924, on the beach at St. Raphael, Zelda met a handsome French naval aviator, Edouard Hozan. The son of a
Mm.
middle class family in Nîmes with a long military tradition, he was a year and 2 days older than her. The antithesis of Fitzgerald, Hozan was a dark, romantic man with curly black hair and a Latin profile. He wore a smart uniform, was muscular and athletic, and led the small group of officers who surrounded Zelda. He regretted having missed the war, longed to smoke opium in Indochina, and wrote a few things for his own pleasure. Attracted to both Scott and Zelda, Hosan found them brimming over with life, rich and free. They brought into our little provincial circle brilliance, imagination, and familiarity with the Parisian and international world to which we had no access. But he soon focused his attention on the vibrant Zelda, a creature who overflowed with activity and was radiant with the desire to take from life every chance her charm, youth, and intelligence provided so abundantly. With no friends in St. Raphael, Scott was eager, as always, for a bit of social life. Behaving like a man of the world, he invited Hosan to dine with them and met him in cafes in the evening. Scott was excited and flattered when men fell in love with his wife, as long as she did not reciprocate their feelings.
Mm.
Left alone with nothing to amuse her, Zelda went to the beach with Hosan, while Scott stayed at home and worked on his novel. You letting your wife go down to the beach with the French naval
Mm.
aviator,
Yeah.
whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Mm.
Yeah. All right. So let's go. Zelda took the chance that life or Hosan provided. A masochistic and sensual passage in her novel describes how he drew her body against him till she felt the blades of his bones carving her own. He was bronze and smelled of the sand and sun. She felt him naked underneath the stretched linen. In her unpublished novel, Caesar's Things, Zelda explains that the heroine is drawn to the Frenchman not only because he is attractive, but also because she is afraid of love and must confront and overcome her fear. She told her husband she loved the French officer, and her husband locked her up in the villa, just as the anxious Scott, during their turbulent courtship, kept repeating that he now understood why they always locked up princesses in towers. Scott had good reason to fear her infidelity, both before and after he married her. Writing of his superior sexual rivals in The Crack Up, he confessed that he could not stop thinking that at one time a sort of droit de seigneur might have been exercised to give one of them my girl. Hosan, using his French charm and aeronautic daring, exercised this right. He invited Zelda to his apartment and seduced her. There was Hosan, she later admitted, and you were justifiably angry. The crisis peaked on the 13th of July when Zelda told Scott that she loved Hosan and asked for a divorce. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go. It ends poorly, obviously.
Yeah.
Hosan, just beginning his career and with no money, wanted a mistress, not a wife. And, if you're going to have a mistress, it doesn't have to be another guy's wife.
Yeah.
You
Could just be some other
yeah.
woman. Yeah.
Even if you're French. Even if you're French. You could just, especially if you're French. There's a culture of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Ugh.
Oh, man.
Though he found Zelda a delightful lover, she did not touch his deepest feelings and meant no more to him than a brief fling on the beach. His transfer elsewhere put an end to their relations, but Zelda, more emotionally involved than Hosan, was deeply hurt by his rejection. When he abandoned her, she tried to kill herself with an overdose of sleeping pills.
Oh, boy.
All right? Okay. So now, not everybody's going to know this, but as we move along, there are different figures who are like, oh, she's crazy. Like it would become more and more clear from kind of this period. Hemingway would be like, oh, she's crazy. She would say crazy things. She'd say things like, Al Jolson is more important than Jesus. Stuff like that. She'd say crazy things. She would say provocative things, but there's a certain weird. She was weird. She would weird people out. She would give people like the ick. Like, what is? Oh, this is crazy. We're not dealing with like, oh, this is not
funny,
fun. These are not
around.
No, we're losing our grip on reality.
Yeah.
So let's see. One of the Murphys remembers a disturbance one night at the Hotel du Cap. Scott sought help from her parents, and Zelda had to be walked up and down the hallway and kept awake until the effect of the pills wore off. That September 1924, Scott wrote, I knew something had happened that could never be repaired. He now realized that he would have to test himself against Zelda's lover, that she was not absolutely committed to him as he was to her, and that he could no longer trust his wife to be faithful. The purity of their marriage had been tainted, their innocence lost. And this guy would go on and become vice admiral. And, he had a storied career. And let's see. So now they're putzing around.
But nobody ever talks about him unless it's in the context of F. Scott Fitzgerald. So
fair enough. That is true. That is
Yeah.
true. Yeah. Yeah. He had a terrible incident happen in Italy. And this is what he said here. And we were doing, this is fascist Italy. Or it's coming anyway. Let's see here. I'm not just the conclusion of this essay, an essay he wrote about Italy, describes a humiliating reprise to his black eye at Princeton in 1920 and his savage beating at the Jungle Club the following year. He'd get in trouble. I mean, he would he'd get drunk, he'd run his mouth, and he'd get into bad situations. Fitzgerald's petty midnight quarrel with some extortionate taxi drivers about the fare back to their hotel ended when he refused to be cheated in a brutal street fight. First, there was one taxi driver, and I had a little the best of it. Then there were two, and I was having a little the worst of it. But I didn't think I was. And when the meddlesome stranger stepped between us, I was in no mood to have it stop there, and I pushed him impatiently out of the way. He came back persistently, lurching in between us, talking in a stream of Italian, doing his best, it seemed to me, to interrupt my offenses and to the advantage of the taxi man. Once too often, he caught my arm. Blind with anger, I turned on him quickly and with more success than I had had so far with the others, caught him under the point of the chin, whereupon, rather to my surprise, he sat down. The unfortunate interloper turned out to be a plainclothes policeman.
Hey,
Fitzgerald was arrested for assaulting an officer.
Yeah.
Taken to a police station and savagely beaten.
Oh, God.
Fitzgerald called this degrading experience just about the rottenest thing that ever happened to me in my life. It aroused his hostility, provoked his prejudices, and inspired his violent fantasies about the country, the politics, and the people. I hate Italians, he told Carl Meyers. He'd fit right in on Twitter, man.
Yeah.
Irish need not apply, Scotty.
Yeah.
They live in tenements and don't have bathtubs. When Harold Ober asked him to write a piece about his travels for the Post, he rather childishly replied that he could not write anything acceptable to that audience unless they wanted an article on Pope Syphilis VI and his morons. It's a bad Catholic here. Yeah. That'll come back later when they bury him, and they won't bury him in a Catholic plot. He imagined filling a theater with the flower of Italy, coming on stage with a machine gun and murdering the entire audience. He thought Italy was trying to live on its glorious past and saw through the histrionic absurdities of fascism. Italy depressed us both beyond measure, he wrote to an editor at Scribner's, a dead land where everything that could be done or said was done long ago. For whoever is deceived by the pseudo-activity under Mussolini is deceived by the spasmodic last jerk of a corpse. All right. So they leave Rome. After getting the shit kicked out of him. Then he turns in The Great Gatsby. Okay, so it's all worth it.
Yeah, he's managing that while all this is going on is pretty incredible.
Yeah. Max Perkins wrote him this. And we're not going to read from The Great Gatsby. Everybody knows it. If you don't read it, if you haven't read it, you need to read it. It's the only Fitzgerald thing that you have to read.
Yeah.
Everybody has to read it. I think you have to. I think it's a must read. And it's like a reread. It's like a read every year or two kind of a novel for Americans, at least. Yeah. And forget the movies.
Yeah.
Forget them. They don't, they don't get it at all. Here's what Perkins said. I think you have every kind of right to be proud of this book. It is an extraordinary book, suggestive of all sorts of thoughts and moods. You adopted exactly the right method of telling it, that of employing a narrator who is more of a spectator than an actor. That puts the reader upon a point of observation on a higher level than that on which the characters stand, and at a distance that gives perspective. In no other way could your irony have been so immensely effective, nor the reader have been enabled so strongly to feel at times the strangeness of human circumstance in a vast, heedless universe. In the eyes of Dr. Eckelberg, various readers will see different significances, but their presence gives a superb touch to the whole thing. Great unblinking eyes, expressionless, looking down upon the human scene. It's magnificent. And he goes on. Um, Finally, you have plainly mastered the craft, of course, but you needed far more than craftsmanship for this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a perfect novel. It's never really been topped. I mean, it's like you're just talking about the highest strata of fiction that's ever been.
Different stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. It's an incredible piece of work.
And Joseph Conrad is a friend of the pod, so I want to talk a little bit about Conrad's influence on this. John Dos Passos noted in the 3 years since his early success, Fitzgerald had thought seriously about his art. His careful study of the works of Joseph Conrad, who died in August of 1924, while Fitzgerald was writing Gatsby, was mainly responsible for his astonishing technical and intellectual advance. I had never made that connection. I did not know about that. It makes sense. In June of 1925, it's like if you take his early writing and then you throw Conrad on top of it, you can sort of see, oh, now that's how we get Gatsby.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah.
In 1925, Fitz told Mencken that he had learned a lot from Conrad and had consciously imitated him in Gatsby. Conrad's influence can be seen in Fitzgerald's evocative symbolism, the green light at the end of Daisy's dock, the desolate wasteland of the Valley of Ashes, the godlike judgment of the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. In his resonant style, revelation of the story by moving forward and backward in time, themes of romantic illusion and corrupted idealism. Fitzgerald's confidential narrator, Nick Carraway, like Conrad's Charlie Marlowe in Heart of Darkness and Lord Jim, provides distance and credibility by retrospectively telling a story that he, a character in the novel, has personally observed. He combines disapproval of and sympathy for Gatsby, just as Marlowe does for Lord Jim. And then it goes on, and there's more about that connection. And of course, it would make sense that Meyers would do this because he wrote a biography about, Conrad. A little more here. Fitzgerald also learned from Conrad to use a more subtle and suggestive conclusion to his fiction. As he remarked to Bishop, it was Ernest Hemingway who developed to me in conversation that the dying fall was preferable to the dramatic ending under certain conditions, and I think we both got the germ of the idea from Conrad. Yeah. And he said that preface to the Narcissus, which he reread while writing Gatsby, had taught him that fiction must appeal to the lingering after effects of the reader's mind. Yeah. One more. Conrad had concluded his African novella Heart of Darkness by connecting the Thames to the primitive past of mankind, symbolized by the Congo. The tranquil waterway leading to the uttermost ends of the earth flowed somber under an overcast sky, seemed to lead into the heart of an immense darkness. Adopting the psychological suggestiveness of the riverine metaphor and alluding to Gatsby's hopeless attempt to repeat the past, Fitzgerald imitated Conrad's appeal to the lingering after effects in his own famous concluding sentence, "So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past." All right, so that's Conrad's influence. Kind of interesting stuff.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about the Poe Fitzgerald connection on the After Dark for patrons. Cool. Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, and I think it's even more poignant knowing that he and his wife went through this affair and everything, and now it's almost like writing this novel. He's like Gatsby trying to collect Daisy back from these rich bastards.
Yeah.
They don't love her like I do.
Right.
Yeah. It's very poignant.
Hmm.
Okay, let's move forward in the bio here. Oh, how are we
How
doing, Brad?
did
Just check.
well,
Yeah, go
well,
ahead.
how did Gatsby do? Like when it was it?
Oh, yeah, let me pull it up. I no, I have it. You're actually getting
Yeah.
ahead of it.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, good.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. No, 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 it's fine. I've got so many books and things.
Mhm.
So yeah, of course, it was Long Island that inspired Gatsby, and the novel was a commercial failure
Ah, come on.
by his standards upon its release
Hmm.
in 1925. It sold fewer than 23,000 copies by the end of the year. So, I mean, listen, great art is
That's
not always, that's still a hell of a lot of copies.
23,000 copies is more than like all but like 7 novels a year sell now. And we've
Yeah,
got like
for real.
4 times the population or whatever.
Right,
So
right.
he did
I
it.
mean,
It's still all right.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like, so,
If you're trying to have $500,000 a year steady income, selling 23,000 books is not enough. That's
well, and
true.
I'm gonna talk
Yeah.
about that, and that this is from the Sometimes Madness is Wisdom, the Zelda and Scott bio. The dollar was worth about 10 times its value today in 2001, and much more in Europe, where many of the currencies were being devalued. To give some idea of its purchasing power, in 1924, a doorman in New York started working at $27.50 a week. With
Hmm.
that, he could buy a quart of milk for 14 cents, a Coke or candy bar for 5 cents, an electric iron for $3.96, a man's 14 karat gold wedding ring for $2.98. Or if he
Whoa.
was out to impress someone, a Hudson coach with a 4-cylinder engine for $1,250.
Hmm.
During this, I mean, he's like writing something and getting 2 cars for writing a story, right? During the 20s, Fitzgerald's income averaged $25,000 a year. Good money, but no fortune. Could have been a fortune. You got to
Hmm.
save that stuff, man.
Right.
Considering their living expenses included expensive restaurants, nightclubs, and cabarets, Paris was still infinitely cheaper than Manhattan. Besides its economic advantages, the French city also was the undisputed artistic capital of the world. A new ballet or play premiered weekly, and there were always new exhibitions and recitals. At any corner, one might happen upon a Dadaist manifestation, then engage in all night conversations at one of the numerous cafes lining the boulevards. All right, so that's sort of about their move to Paris and all the rest of it. But
Hmm.
you know, it's tough because he's not they're living past their means,
Yeah.
and I think it's a case where he's just expecting it to just go on forever,
Yeah.
and it doesn't always
Yeah.
work that way. Your play doesn't always make you a multimillionaire, and he's young. It's just
Yeah.
young and stupid, and
Right. Right.
and he's
Right.
married to a woman who, and they have a life, they have an image to maintain
They do have
too.
an image to maintain. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh
Hmm.
man, but just poor. You said $25,000 isn't a fortune. Well, if a car, what do we say, is like $2,000?
1,500. Yeah.
Yeah, 1,500. So what you're talking? It's 20 cars, 20 cars a year,
Right, right, right,
right?
right.
Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, do that math, right? That's all. You're making a lot of money.
You're
You know,
making a
it's
lot of
crazy
money.
too. It's that you were talking about Paris and started thinking like Paris is not cheap anymore. Paris is
No,
very
nothing.
expensive.
Nothing is. You have to go to South America
Yeah.
or Eastern Europe, and even then, it's just like
Yeah.
nothing is cheap. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to hide anymore. You have to.
No.
Where are you going to go?
There's
Yeah,
no,
there's
yeah,
nowhere to
there's no
go.
great big cultural centerpiece city that is also affordable. Yeah,
I
they
mean,
don't
you could go to
exist.
Mexico City. You could maybe
Yeah.
go to parts of this, South America, but it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, certainly not in Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
they really turned the screw, didn't they, Brad?
Yeah. Yeah, they did. Yeah.
They really fucked us, didn't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Think
Yeah.
they did. They keep
Yeah.
they keep squeezing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I log into Facebook and I
Oh,
almost always regret it. But there's almost always somebody bitching about how little money like how nobody can buy anything, how things are fucked. And I'm like, yes, I understand.
yeah. Yeah.
I
They're not
understand.
wrong.
No, they're not wrong.
No,
I
and
just if
sometimes
you
when you see
nope.
when you see like those TikToks, and sometimes you'll see some young 22-year-old person, and they're sort of like having they're on there and they're like, I don't understand. Got a college degree. I got this job at such and such a kind of a job, and I can't afford to do anything. I just have to go home and sit on my couch until I go to work. And you'll see people drag them, right? Because they're complaining. But
Sure.
like you're watching a person's like dream fall apart. Like they'd been sold a bill of goods. and it is not true.
Not true at
And
all.
you can't blame them for having a little freak out about it, in my
Sure.
opinion. Yeah.
Sure. And then I mean, it's like Dan Baltic's friend of the show, lawyer of the show's recent
Yeah.
tweet about $100,000 now is the little homie salary.
Right.
It's the new 40,000.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's glib and
Yeah.
funny, but it's
Yeah.
also kind of like, yeah, then that kid out of college makes
Yeah.
$90,000 in New York for the first time and
Yeah.
realizes what the take home is after taxes.
Oh, it's crazy. Dude, not to sidetrack too much, but I was talking to my parents the other day and near them, where right near where I grew up, they never moved. Down this street, they started building these apartments, and they're just like these single floor apartments, 2 bedrooms, I think. Nothing nice. They're not like high end by any means. And
Sure.
where I'm from, I mean, like you're looking at a bowling alley across the street. Like that's
Right.
and nothing wrong with bowling. I'm just trying to paint a picture of the sort of the class, right? No amenities. There's not a gym or a pool or a marina or a golf. None of that. And I was like, did you ever like hear what the rent is at those places? Because they just built them, so we're sitting there, we're talking about them. And my mom said, yeah, it's $2,700 a month. What?
What?
For like a normal two
Yeah.
bedroom apartment in a nowhere town, not
Well, but it
next to
is it
nothing?
is very close to the birthplace of Brad Kelly. To the
I
it
heard they
is
put that
close
in the
to a
pamphlet.
national
Yeah.
historic land future coming attractions.
Right,
This is
right,
going to be
right,
like the
right.
Graceland for podcasters,
Yeah, yeah,
and the
right, right.
Graceland for podcasting tarot reader
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
novelists.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
No,
right.
it's totally bonkers. I mean,
Yeah,
and who's going to pay that? And then who knows? It's going to be like a bunch of, and I'm not talking shit about it, but is it going
right.
to be like a bunch of like Section 8 or like
I
low income
yeah,
housing to offset
possibly.
taxes?
Yeah,
It's all
right.
it's all financial engineering and
Yeah,
flim flam and fugazi
right.
fugazi. And I call those buildings their Facebook apartments.
Hmm.
They look like Facebook.
Yeah,
Like, and
they
I know,
do.
they're boxy and
Right,
square and
right. Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing interesting about the apartments, but the other thing is there's nothing else around there.
sure.
You can't walk to anywhere.
Right.
There's no jobs that I don't I can't
Right.
even wrap my head around the fact that this is a
It's
thing.
probably
Anyway,
not even, they're probably not even meaning to rent anything out. I mean, it's
yeah.
just probably
Yeah.
just some sort of like meta real estate deal.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I
it's
guess
nuts, dude.
what I'm interested in is this context of the time that Fitzgerald and Zelda are living. Like, there's a they blew it all, but there's also like a lifestyle they were able to have for a little while that's impossible now,
More or
basically.
less. More or
Yeah.
less.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're making $500,000, you could
You could live pretty good.
you could
Yeah.
approximate something like this still,
Yeah.
but like it's still just not quite as extreme, not quite as extravagant. Are you
Mm,
really even like after taxes? You're gonna
yeah.
have to pay taxes to the
Right.
federal government on that,
No. And
where
then
no
the
matter where
capital
you live.
gains tax
You're
or
gonna, yeah,
whatever.
whatever.
If they,
Well,
yeah.
you're gonna have to pay taxes in France if you
Yeah.
move. I mean, it's just everything's
Also,
become so
if
much
you don't
more.
if you don't come from a lot of money, if you don't come from money to get that $500,000 a year, you're working your ass off in a lot of cases
Oh
too,
yeah,
right? You're not
oh
just
yeah,
chilling on the beach getting wasted with
right,
the,
right.
right.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Anyway,
anyway,
rant
yeah,
over.
yeah.
Yeah.
Rant over. Brad, I have to stand up and use the bathroom one more time. Can you talk just briefly about the like Gatsby and like
Sure.
what does Gatsby mean as an American novelist? What does it mean to
Yeah.
your cohort of writers?
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, Gatsby, it's one of those things. I mean, I got introduced to it in high school when you get introduced to all of these sorts of, it's so in my mind, originally anyway, it starts as in the same milieu as like Catcher in the Rye and the Grapes of Wrath, and it's certainly it's in that echelon and better than most of the stuff that's in that echelon. But I do remember revisiting it actually when I got to graduate school, and I had already read it a couple of times by then, and recognizing not only did Gatsby sort of strike this very particular chord with that novelists are frequently trying to do, which is somehow not only encapsulating a time period, but showing you that time period in a way that nothing else was able to. And part of it is, trying to recognize the patterns that nobody else is seeing, but then once the writer has seen them, it's obvious to everyone. That is how one of the things I think Gatsby's doing. But from a craft level, it is I like to use the analogy of carpentry for craft, like writing craft. and it is like the most exquisitely crafted armoire you've ever seen. If you really are doing like what shout out to the critic, I can't remember her first name, Heather Vendler, I think is her name, who just passed away at age 90, who invented the term, came up with the term close reading. If you do a close reading on Fitzgerald, you realize that like every single phrase matters. It's all interlocked, it's all interdependent on each other, and it doesn't make it feel claustrophobic. It makes it feel like this beautiful tight-knit brocade. It's just a gorgeous novel from the sentence level to the plot to characters. It's amazing.
Yeah, it has it all. It really
Yeah.
does. And it's poetic and it's a uniquely American voice,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but singular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing and for
Sure.
covering.
Yeah.
All right. So in the interest of time, we're going to move along here. After wintering in Italy, the Fitzgeralds, which we talked about, they returned to France, where they alternated between Paris and the Riviera until 1926. During this period, Fitzgerald became friends with Gertrude Stein, of course, who
Mm.
would introduce him to everybody, right? She came
Right.
up with the phrase "the lost generation," if I'm not
Mm.
mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bookseller Sylvia Beach, right? Shakespeare and Company, James Joyce, Ezra Pound, that whole milieu, he was
Mm-hmm.
there. And most notable among them was a relatively unknown Ernest Hemingway.
Mm-hmm.
We've done Hemingway. You can go back, listen to the Hemingway episode. We've covered a lot of that in that in that episode.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk more about this in the After Dark, patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. Everything's at Art of Dark Pod. We've got Substack too.
Mm-hmm.
And they first met in May of 1925. And Hemingway later recalled that during this early period of their relationship, Fitzgerald became his most loyal friend.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little bit about this, and we'll talk more about it in the After Dark. But exalted by the critical success of The Great Gatsby, but not yet aware of its disappointing sales. So it was critically successful, sale not relatively not great. Would be great for anybody. Would be great today. Yeah. But by his standards. They left Capri in 1925 April, and they joined the 30,000 Americans who were then living in Paris. They lived near the Arc de Triomphe until the end of the year. A photograph taken at Christmas shows an elegantly dressed and apparently happy family in front of an elaborately decorated tree, a pile of presents, a low chandelier, and an overflowing bookcase. Scott wore a three-piece suit and thick-soled shoes. Zelda, with slender legs but now wider at the hips, was burdened by a huge corsage, and the beribboned 4-year-old Scotty, nervous about the pose, bit her lower lip and showed her knickers as they all did a chorus line kick. In reality, the Fitzgeralds were not the secure and happy family they appeared to be. The novelist Louis Bromfield, who visited them that year, found their place ornate and pretentious. It represented to some degree the old aspirations and a yearning for stability, but somehow it got only halfway and was neither one thing nor the other. The furniture was gilt Louis XVI, but a suite from the Galerie Lafayette department store. The wallpaper was the usual striped stuff in dull colors that went with that sort of flat. It was all rather like a furniture shop window, and I always had the impression that the Fitzgeralds were camping there between two worlds. Zelda, noting their inability to escape the wounds inflicted by her affair with Hosan, recalled that the stale flat smelled of a church chancery because it was impossible to ventilate, and became a perfect breeding place for the germs of bitterness they brought with them from the Riviera. Scotty also remembered that the apartments were always rather dark and unprepossessing, with their only redeeming feature the views over the rooftops, which so fascinated my mother. The elevators were always en pan, out of order, and I can feel the heavy chains suspended from the ceiling that caused such an uproarious commotion in all our toilets. All right, so let's see here. Got to get a little bit about Hemingway and their contrast, right? 6 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier than Fitzgerald, Hemingway was a literary version of the bloodied and bandaged football heroes Scott had worshipped in college. Hemingway later told Arthur Meisner, to exemplify Fitzgerald's immaturity and naivete, that he remembered one time in New York, we were walking down Fifth Avenue and Scott said, "If only I could play football again with everything I know about it now." But Hemingway, he's having like a Bundy, Ted Bundy moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did Ted Bundy play football, or am I thinking King of the Hill?
No, yeah, Ted Bundy, Al Bundy.
Yeah,
Ted
or
Bundy
Al
was the serial killer.
Bundy.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Ted Bundy. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Did Ted Bundy
He,
play
he
football?
may
So,
have. Yeah.
yeah, he
Yeah.
may have. Yeah,
He's
we
got
don't
more of a
have. That's
soccer player build, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's a
But
different podcast. Yeah, yeah. Um, but Hemingway, who did not meet Fitzgerald in New York until after he published The Sun Also Rises in 1926, actually attributed to Fitzgerald a statement made by his own football anti-hero, Robert Cohn. I think I'd rather play football again with what I know about handling myself now.
hmm.
Hemingway would do this too to Fitzgerald. Hemingway would put words in Fitzgerald's mouth. I mean, he kind of knew that he was his number one rival,
Mm,
and I think Hemingway probably took a perverse pleasure in watching Fitzgerald kind of fall to pieces, but
probably.
was
Yeah.
probably also a little bit sad about it.
Yeah.
Um, in any case, Hemingway had a masculine strength, capacity for drink, athletic prowess, and experience in battle that Fitzgerald sadly lacked and desperately desired.
Mhm.
And his impressive achievements seem to magnify Fitzgerald's failures. This is a fascinating thing that's coming up here. This is Art of Darkness, the
Mhm.
podcast about the dark side of creativity.
Mhm.
Both writers were fascinated by the war. Hemingway had suffered a traumatic wound when serving in the Red Cross in Italy, while Fitzgerald had merely experienced non-combatants shell shock. Fitzgerald owned a blood-curdling collection of photograph albums of horribly mutilated soldiers, stereopticon slides of executions and roasted aviators, and lavishly illustrated French tomes of living men whose faces had been chewed away by shrapnel. In a remarkably morbid letter of December 1927, he told Hemingway, I have a new German war book, Die Krieg against Krieg, the war against war, which shows men who mislaid their faces in Picardy and the Caucasus. You can imagine how I thumb it over, my mouth fairly slathering with fascination. The
Mm.
photographs in Ernst Friedrich's Krieg dem Krieg, or maybe Krieg dem Kriege, Berlin, 1924, War of Wars, I think, stimulated his pathological curiosity about the war, a subject he had ignored at Princeton and evaded in his first two novels, and allowed him to confront in his imagination scenes of violence, mutilation, and death. Hemingway also took perverse pleasure in emphasizing the grisly details of war wounds in works like The Natural History of the Dead. He too was fascinated by gruesome photos of maimed bodies. In 1935, he took the collected pictures of bloated corpses after the Metacum hurricane in the Florida Keys and during the Spanish Civil War, reproduced some astonishing horrors in Dying Well or Badly. But the two writers had very different ideas about the use of violent experience in art. In December of 1925, Hemingway defined his attraction to the intensity of war by telling Fitzgerald, the reason you are so sore you miss the war is because war is the best subject of all. It
Mm.
groups the maximum of material and speeds up the action and brings out all sorts of stuff that normally you would have to wait a lifetime to get. Hemingway believed Fitzgerald just had Zelda.
Yeah, that's a kind of
was
war, believe
that
me.
was his war for sure. Zelda was his war, and his war with himself too. Hemingway believed you had to live the actual experience before you could write about it honestly. Fitzgerald believed, as he had to, given his lack of experience in war, that imagination could serve the artist's purpose just as well. That if you weren't able to function in action, you might at least be able to tell about it because you felt the same intensity. It was a backdoor way out of facing reality.
Mm.
All right, it goes on, and we'll talk more about that in the After Dark. Um, Kind of fun to think about those guys together, man. If there's like
Yeah.
one kind of place in time you could throw yourself, that like 1920s Paris would be, that'd
Oh
be a
yeah.
move. When
Yeah.
somebody asks that question, where would you go if you could
Yeah.
go anywhere
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
time?
Well, you got
You know,
those two, and then you also got Joyce and Stein and a bunch of other also ran kind of folks that were tremendously talented and interesting, right? Yeah. It
oh,
was,
I mean, and all the visual artists and
mhm.
the
Mhm.
painters and the theater and all of it. I mean, it would just
Yeah.
be a fascinating
Incredible.
time. If you could
Yeah.
go back with French, it
Yeah.
would be just an
And
amazing
if
time.
you do, buy a little real estate. Just sit
Yeah,
up.
just buy an apartment, buy an eightplex apartment. Yeah, buy some paintings.
Yeah, I mean, wait 100 years. Yeah,
Yeah, buy some paintings. You got to invest.
yeah,
You got to
that's right.
invest.
That's right.
Buy some meme coins. See what
Yeah,
happens.
yeah,
Buy some meme coins 4 years ago,
yeah. There you go. Yeah,
and then
and hold.
through everything
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
until it's time to sell,
Right,
and then
right.
sell. Buy low, sell high.
Yeah,
That's
that's
it.
good advice.
That's the
I'm gonna write
entire
that down.
buy low, sell high, pay your taxes. Don't go to
Yeah,
jail.
yeah,
Um, all right. So, in contrast to his friendship with Scott, Hemingway disliked Zelda and described her as insane in his memoir, A Movable Feast. Hemingway
yeah.
claimed that Zelda preferred her husband to write lucrative short stories as opposed to novels in order to support her accustomed lifestyle. I always felt the story in the Post was tops, Zelda later recalled, but Scott couldn't stand to write them.
Mm.
So she's saying, "Hey, why don't you write these write this
Yeah,
throwaway
crank out this
stuff
crap. Yeah.
and pay for another week at the clubs, another month hanging out at the clubs, drinking every night, eating lobster. Like
Mhm.
why,
Mhm.
Yeah, just write it. Who cares?
Right,
Yeah.
right, right,
Yeah. You go write another episode of your vampire show,
right.
Scotty.
Yeah.
Vampires, they're
Yeah.
coming back. They're gonna
Yeah,
be hot.
it's gotta be what time for a Christmas special on the Vampire
Sure.
Sopranos show, right? Throw
That's
that
right.
thing.
On the
Yeah,
it's the Sopranos with vampires. They're a
yeah.
mob vampire family, and I'm the writer to write it. I'm very spirited about vampires.
Mhm,
And just
mhm.
Netflix is like,
Right.
yes, yes. Oh boy. Fitzgerald often wrote stories for magazines, Saturday Evening Post, Collier's Weekly, and Esquire. And this is about the income. He would first write his stories in an authentic manner, then rewrite them to add plot twists,
Yeah,
increasing their
boy.
saleability as magazine stories.
Yeah.
This whoring, as
Let me see
Hemingway
if
called,
I could see this. Ah, that's so painful. The second draft, you're like, let me see if I can make this faker and lamer. Let's see if I can. Well, that's a good line. I better take that out.
it would be like if we overproduced this podcast, like we would rehearse it and
Yeah,
add a
yeah,
bunch of noises and
yeah,
little
yeah,
interstitials and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Anyway,
Ugh,
that's not us.
yeah,
This
gross.
whoring, as Hemingway called these sales, emerged as a sore point in their friendship. After reading The Great Gatsby, an impressed Hemingway vowed to put any differences with Fitzgerald aside and to aid him in any way he could.
Well,
Although
yeah, sorry.
hmm,
Especially if you see that he wrote Gatsby. If the best that Fitzgerald could do was some crap in, some mediocre crap in the Saturday Evening Post, fine. But like you wrote frigging The Great Gatsby. Like clearly this is,
it's like, dude, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. You're wasting
right.
your time. You're wasting your energy. Why you need to be working on the next thing like this?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Fitz is like, I can't, and
Right.
I think he was also drinking heavily, probably
Yeah.
difficult to sustain a novel.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Hemingway feared Zelda would derail his writing career, Fitzgerald's writing career.
Yeah.
Hemingway alleged that Zelda sought to destroy her husband, and she purportedly taunted Fitzgerald over his penis size. So it was Zelda who apparently made a comment about Fitz's dick that
Yeah.
provoked his anxiety about it.
God.
Um, and I think he was a grower, not a shower. I think
Hmm.
that's what I
Okay.
think.
Okay.
That's after exhaustive study and much reading. after after examining it in a public restroom, Hemingway confirmed Fitzgerald's member to be of average size.
Yeah.
A more serious
Hemingway's the
riff.
bro, dude.
That's a bro move. You're
That's a
fine,
bro
dude.
move.
You're
Yeah.
fine, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, and then, dude, the amount of ink that's been spilled about this moment, it's just so like, okay, all right, we
Yeah.
got it. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And there are authors who are like, well, but how would he know? Because it's pretty
Yeah.
clear that he probably wasn't erect, and that's what matters. And
Hmm.
I think in one of the books is like Zelda went so far as to blame Fitzgerald on her not having an orgasm.
Right.
I
Right.
can't have an orgasm on your small dick.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
geez, man,
Yeah.
shove the dagger in.
Right.
My
Right. Yeah.
God,
Maybe you guys
pull
are
it.
maybe you guys are all drinking so much you got nerve damage down there. I don't know.
Yeah, right,
Like
right, right. Yeah, yeah.
you guys are
Yeah,
both physical wrecks at this point. So
sure,
no.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Well, and it would later come out, and it would later come out that she had like legitimately, and I know this is a tendency of biographers now to
Mhm.
search for homosexual tendencies and all the rest,
Mm.
but like literally, like during her mental break, it was like it would come out. She would like kind of almost molest her nurses at times.
Oh,
Like she
okay.
had, bisexual, homosexual desires,
Yeah.
there were
Okay.
these
Okay.
repressed things that weren't, being expressed. So,
Mm,
who knows how
yeah.
much that might have contributed to it. And yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Huh.
All
Okay.
right. A more serious rift soon occurred at when Zelda belittled Fitzgerald with homophobic slurs and accused him of engaging in a homosexual relationship with Hemingway,
God.
which under no circumstances did that happen.
Yeah.
Fitzgerald decided to have sex with a prostitute to prove his heterosexuality. Well, I mean, that does prove it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That does prove it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, I'm thinking of that. You remember that episode of Seinfeld where Jerry and George like goof around that they're gay together, and it turns out that the woman sitting behind him is like a reporter from the Village Voice or something.
Mm, hmm
At one
hmm
point, when she confronts them, George is like, "I'll have sex with you on this table right now."
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a move. I am
Yeah.
not gay. I am sleeping with this prostitute.
Yeah.
Zelda found condoms he had purchased before any encounter occurred, and a
Mm.
bitter quarrel ensued, resulting
Yeah,
in
boy.
lingering jealousy. Soon after, Zelda threw herself down a flight of marble stairs at a
Jeez.
party because Fitzgerald, engrossed in talking to Isadora Duncan, ignored her. All right.
Oh God.
They would spend a couple of years on the Riviera in Antibes, and a book of short stories would come out called All the Sad Young Men.
Mm.
And this was published in 1926 by Charles Scribner's sons. And he wrote a letter to Perkins saying, "7 of the stories deal with young men of my generation in rather unhappy moods," to justify the title of the collection.
Mm.
Sad, sensitive young men. I mean, again,
Yeah.
Scotty
Yeah.
would fit in right now, dude.
Yeah.
I'd go down to the St. Paul Hotel and fucking tie one on with this guy, man.
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
do
Why
it.
not?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, like, listen, if there was ever a reason to drink, fall
Mhm.
off the wagon, it
Yeah.
would be if F. Scott Fitzgerald came back from the dead.
Yeah.
It would be like,
Okay, let's do this. Yeah.
I'm calling an Uber. I'm calling an Uber. All right. I'm calling a Lyft and an Uber. They're going to follow us around all night. You know what I mean? Like, no, for
Yeah,
real,
yeah,
dude.
yeah.
Um, all the Sad Young Men captures in a phrase the feeling he had in losing the most vibrant experiences of his life before age took them away. He wrote the stories during a time of disillusionment. He was in financial difficulty. He believed his wife was romantically involved with another man, and so forth. Let's see here. Upon publication, and somewhat belying the notion that Fitzgerald's most famous novel had not been enthusiastically received, the New York Times wrote, "The publication of this volume of short stories might easily have been the anticlimax after the perfection and success of The Great Gatsby of last spring. A novel so widely praised by people whose recognition counts is stiff competition. It is even something of a problem for a reviewer to find new and different words to properly grace the occasion. Must be said that the collection as a whole is not sustained to the high excellence of The Great Gatsby, but it has stories of fine insight and finished craft." Ironically, in a letter 9 months earlier, Fitzgerald had advised his editor, Max Perkins, against publicizing the book through the newspaper, rather not use advertising appropriation in Times. People who read Times book review won't be interested in me. So, he's, pretty mindful, but this has, Winter Dreams in it,
Mm.
which we covered in part one. And actually, you can hear a reading of it in Fitzgerald part one, which we did live with my theater company, Badmouth Theater Company, badmouthtc.com. And so that is worth going back and listening to. Another story in it is called Absolution. And Brad, I sent the link over.
Yep,
Are
I
you
got
willing
it.
to
I
read?
got it
Okay.
open.
Little
Yeah.
context. So just read a little bit of Absolution for us. It's a short story. It was originally published in the American Mercury in June of 1924. And
F. Scott Fitzgerald bought a sailboat after he published it.
right, yeah, he bought a yacht. So it focuses on a young boy named Rudolph Miller who often fantasizes about a self-created alter ego called Blatchford Sarnemington. Rudolph, an 11-year-old Catholic, attends a confession with Father Schwartz. Rudolph describes what he believes is a terrible sin he committed. In a flashback, Rudolph lies to Father Schwartz in a previous confession. Rudolph also gets in trouble with his father when he attempts to avoid communion by drinking water before. You're supposed to fast for an hour before communion.
Mm.
And if you're in a state of sin, you're not supposed to take the communion. So he's trying to get out of sinning grievously by taking communion in a state of sin by drinking water because he lied to a priest in confession. So yeah, I'm helpful here, aren't I?
Yeah.
The one true faith, man. That's my beat. I'm not a good Catholic, but I am a Catholic. After telling Father Schwartz about these two instances, Father Schwartz collapses and a startled Rudolph flees. All right, so read just the first page of this.
Yeah. There once was a priest with cold, watery eyes who, in the still of the night, wept cold tears. He wept because the afternoons were warm and long, and he was unable to attain a complete mystical union with our Lord. Sometimes, near 4 o'clock, there was a rustle of Swede girls along the path by his window, and in their shrill laughter he found a terrible dissonance that made him pray aloud for the twilight to come. At twilight, the laughter and the voices were quieter, but several times he had walked past Romberg's drugstore when it was dusk and the yellow lights shone inside and the nickel taps of the soda fountain were gleaming, and he had found the scent of cheap toilet soap desperately sweet upon the air. He passed that way when he returned from hearing confessions on Saturday nights, and he grew careful to walk on the other side of the street so that the smell of soap would float upward before it reached his nostrils as it drifted, rather like incense, toward the summer moon. But there was no escape from the hot madness of 4 o'clock. From his window, as far as he could see, the Dakota wheat thronged the valley of the Red River. The wheat was terrible to look upon, and the carpet pattern to which, in agony, he bent his eyes, sent his thought brooding through grotesque labyrinths, open always to the unavoidable sun. One afternoon, when he had reached the point where the mind runs down like an old clock, his housekeeper brought into his study a beautiful and tense little boy of 11 named Rudolph Miller. The little boy sat down in a patch of sunshine, and the priest, at his walnut desk, pretended to be very busy. This was to conceal his relief that someone had come into his haunted room. Presently, he turned around and found himself staring into two enormous staccato eyes, lit with gleaming points of cobalt light. For a moment, their expression startled him. Then he saw that his visitor was in a state of abject fear. Call it there. So, yeah, it's quite good. That paragraph about I had no familiarity with this. That paragraph about the first bit is great, but like this paragraph about from his window looking at the wheat and the grotesque labyrinth of it, it's so strong. The images are so strong. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not all his magazine writing was trash, just most of it by far. But yeah. So there you go. I just wanted to get that in.
Yeah,
just giving you an idea of where he's at. Wanted to give Brad a chance to get his voice in. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna be moving rapidly along here.
Okay.
Fitzgerald's struggles continued as he and Zelda returned to America, where Zelda's mental health deteriorated, leading to her diagnosis of schizophrenia and prolonged hospitalizations. I'm going to jump ahead here, and what I'm going to do is there's an appendix in the Meyers biography that I really like. He's got an appendix about Fitzgerald and Poe that we're going to read in the After Dark, but he's got one that is just literally Zelda's timeline of like losing it.
Oh boy.
So I'm going to read that right now. Yeah, Appendix 1, Poe and Fitzgerald. We'll come to that. Appendix 2. Zelda's illness. Now we're still a few years ahead of this, okay? But this is where we finally land for Zelda. First breakdown, April 23rd through May 2nd of 1930. Malmaison Hospital literally means bad house hospital, west of Paris. I believe Maison means house in French, west of Paris. Treated by Professor Claude, discharged herself against the doctor's wishes. May 22nd, through June 4th, 2 weeks. That's 20 days later. Valmont Clinic, Lyon, above Montreux in Switzerland. Dr. H.A. Trutman, transferred from a hospital that treated physical disease to a psychiatric clinic. June 4th, 1930 through September 15th, 1931. And the doctors all along here are like, oh, this isn't just like, because I mean, even to this day, sometimes they'll be like, you just got to rest. You're having a break. Just stay here for 5 days. Sleep.
Yeah.
That's what they'll do.
Yeah.
This is like the doctor's like, oh, we need like psychiatry here.
Right.
This is like it. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
15 and a half months. So June 4th to 1930 to September 15th, 1931. Les Rives des Prangines Clinic, Nyon, 14 miles north of Geneva in Switzerland. Dr. Oscar Forel, apparently well enough to be discharged by the hospital. Second breakdown. February. So she gets out in September. We're back in February. February 12th through June 26th. Henry Phipps Psychiatric Clinic of Johns Hopkins University Hospital, Baltimore. Dr. Adolf Meyer, Dr. Mildred Squires, and Dr. Thomas Rennie, apparently recovered and discharged. Third breakdown. February 12th, month there. And it goes on like this. So now we've got 4 more hospitals. And then we'll come back to that at the end of this episode. But that's where we're heading. So anybody right now who's saying about Zelda, like, she's freaking me out, dude, you got a problem. Everybody was kind of right. And we're coming up to the point where she throws herself. I think at this point she's already thrown herself into the dancing, where she convinced that she's going to study ballet. In fact, I want to get the timeline of that right, so I'm going to go into her Wikipedia. Just
starting as like a mid-20s,
right, a mid-20s, yeah, exactly.
And for people who are not familiar with this, if it comes to ballet, this is like in the your mid-20s as a guy being like, I think I'm going to try to play professional football, but you never played before,
right. It'd be like yeah, and it's actually a few years from where we're at now in the story. It was at the age of 28.
Oh my God.
She became obsessed with Russian ballet, and she decided to embark on a career as a prima ballerina.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about this. It's just so tragic too, because it's like, there is such a thing as modern dance. Like at 28, even now you could say, I'm going to become a dancer, and you could devote your life to dance, and you could probably have like a modest career. You might not end up a professional in New York,
but you could end up on a stage, and you could have
on a stage.
Right.
Yeah. And you could have a fulfilling, it's probably never going to pay the bills. But then again, who knows? You might end up in a modern dance. I don't know how it all works. Dance isn't my thing, but but ballet is just like, there's just stuff that I just don't even know if it's possible at 28 to start and to have a career then or now.
No, the physical demands and the things that you have to make your body do they have to be going on.
And you've already had a baby.
Right.
I mean, and just, and she would practice it maniacally. It'd be like saying, yeah, it's so tragic, dude. And so like wacky. And of course he had the money to facilitate this, and they paid her instructor. It was like not cheap. She was studying with like the best, and studying among like young, trainees, to just like such a tragic, awkward scenario for everybody. And it'd be like saying, I'm going to become a podcaster at 28 years old. It's too late. You got to be doing.
Frankly, it's too early.
I've been doing this since I was 14, baby.
It's like the Talmud. If you start before 40, you'll go insane.
You heard it here. The podcasting is like the Talmud. What's your handle on Twitter? What's Art of Dark Pod? Art of Dark Pod on Twitter. Brad Mans that. So if you have any thoughts about the idea that podcasting is just like the Talmud,
Yeah,
let's
I'm
make
kidding.
sure
I'm
that
kidding.
Brad
I'm
here.
kidding,
Yeah, of
Phil.
course. Of course.
I think it's
Yeah.
the Kabbalah,
Yeah.
not the Talmud.
Ah,
Anyway,
okay,
the
right,
joke
right.
remains. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't, we don't know. What do we know?
No, we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, it'd be like the Kabbalah. Yeah, podcasting is like Kabbalah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so and his own health and finances declined. He's drinking heavily. Their marriage continues to disintegrate, and his literary output wanes. In 1926, film producer John W. Considine Jr. invited Fitzgerald to Hollywood during the Golden Age to write a flapper comedy for United Artists.
Okay.
He agreed and moved into a studio-owned bungalow with Zelda in January of 1927. In Hollywood, the Fitzgeralds attended parties where they danced the Black Bottom and mingled with film stars. The Black Bottom was a dance, became popular in the 1920s, and it originated among African Americans in the rural South. The Black Bottom eventually spread to mainstream American culture and became a national craze in the 1920s.
Okay.
The Black Bottom. All right. And yeah, the rhythm of the Black Bottom is based on the Charleston. Bradford's version, printed with the sheet music, gave these instructions. Here we go. Mooch to your left, then mooch to your right. No, hang on here. Hop down front, then doodle back. Doodle means slide.
Yeah. Okay.
Mooch to your left, then mooch to your right. Hands on your hips and do the mess around. Break a leg until you're near the ground. Break a leg is a hobbling step.
Yeah,
now that's the old Black Bottom dance. All right.
Okay.
So there you go. Okay.
I could mooch.
Fun.
I mean, I could mooch. I don't know if I can mooch to the right. I can mooch to the left. Anyway, yeah. I can doodle. I know I can doodle.
It's very interesting because I did not know this, and there's a great play by August Wilson called Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, 1982 play, and it's set around recording of the song. So there you go.
Okay.
And there's a movie, 2020 movie.
Okay.
So there you go. Okay. No, Black Bottom dance. All right. So that's what I'm saying. She'd be twerking today.
Yeah.
And they mingled with film stars. I don't even know if twerking is still popular. I don't even know.
I'm not sure.
That's not my. I don't know. I don't stay up on TikTok looking for twerking videos. At one party, they outraged guests Ronald Colman and Constance Talmadge by a prank. They requested their watches and, retreating into the kitchen, boiled the expensive timepieces in a pot of tomato sauce.
Base.
So right here, give us your watches. We're going to go boil your watches. Okay. All right. The Hollywood life's novelty quickly faded for the Fitzgeralds, and Zelda frequently complained of boredom. While attending a lavish party at the Pickfair estate, Fitzgerald met 17-year-old Lois Moran, a starlet who had gained widespread fame for her role in Stella Dallas in 1925. Desperate for intellectual conversation, Moran and Fitzgerald discussed literature and philosophy for hours while sitting on a staircase. Age gap. Yeah. Fitzgerald was 31 years old and past his prime, but the smitten Moran regarded him as a sophisticated, handsome, and gifted writer. Consequently, she pursued a relationship with him. The starlet became a muse for the author, and he wrote her into a short story called Magnetism, in which a young Hollywood film starlet caused a married writer to waver in his sexual devotion to his wife. I mean, come on, man. You gotta like hide this shit somewhat, right?
Right. Zelda, what do you think of this story?
Hey, what do you you remember France? Do you remember The Aviator? I do. I certainly do, Zelda. Fitzgerald later rewrote Rosemary Hoyt, one of the central characters in Tender is the Night, to mirror Moran. Jealous of Fitzgerald and Moran, an irate Zelda set fire to her own expensive clothing in a bathtub.
Yeah,
she disparaged the teenage Moran as a breakfast food that many men identified with, whatever they missed from life. So, you're going to go,
she's not wrong.
Get with this teenager to relive your youth, right? Tragic. Fitzgerald's relations with Moran further exacerbated the Fitzgerald's marital difficulties, no shit. And after merely 2 months in jazz age Hollywood, the unhappy couple departed for Delaware in March of 1927.
Yeah, because if you're bored in Hollywood, the first place, the top of my list. Let's go. What is that from Wayne's World?
We're in Delaware.
Delaware. I've got a gun. Let's go to a Broadway show. Something like that. You remember that from
no, no,
Wayne's
no.
World?
Yeah, of course. They just
Yeah.
they keep going around the world, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
they're we're in Delaware. Yeah, it's a great little funny moment. That
I'm
movie
sure there's a
holds
lot
up.
of, I've never been there,
That
but
that movie is 100% like a vibe.
yeah.
That
Yeah.
movie holds up. It's still funny.
Yeah.
All right, so they take an estate, L or
Okay.
Z, all right, in Delaware. And this is where the alcoholism gets worse and her behavior becomes even more erratic. And she would experience boredom and isolation while he wrote.
Of course,
She
yeah.
would interrupt him while he was working, and
Yeah.
they're miserable. And
She needs a friggin' hobby.
well, and
Something.
she gets one, right,
Right.
but it's not a hobby. She's
Yeah.
deranged. She
Yeah.
thinks she's gonna be as big as him, but just in the ballet, right? Yeah, her old childhood dream, and they have the means to sort of facilitate this fantasia.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
it's sad.
stung by his criticism that all great women use their talents constructively, Zelda had a deep desire to develop a talent that was entirely her own. At the age of 28, she becomes obsessed with the Russian ballet. And she says, I'm going to have a career as a prima ballerina. Okay, sure. Her friend Gerald Murphy counseled against their ambition and remarked that there are limits to what a woman of Zelda's age can do, and it was obvious that she had taken up the dance too late. Despite being far too old to achieve such ambition, Scott Fitzgerald paid for Zelda to begin practicing under the tutelage of Catherine Littlefield, director of the Philadelphia Opera Ballet. So not
I
cheap.
mean, yeah, jeez. But
Yeah.
probably from his end, it's like maybe it'll make her happy for a while, give her some structure, get her out of the house for a minute. Like,
Sure.
yeah,
Sure. It's just sort of a case of like, could we pick something that isn't like I'm having a career in this?
right, 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 right.
Like,
There's so many cool things you could pick up at 28 and do really
right.
well at. You could become a
She
phenomenal cook starting at
You
age
could a
28, right?
painter,
A painter. Yeah.
painter. You could
Hmm.
do, yeah. And she would draw. She would draw. She would paint. Yeah. Here's a little bit from the Meyers bio about this. So they returned to LRZ after a 2-year lease in 1928. Oh, there's a little bit here I think is interesting. So this is something that, and she would paint. Um, let's read this. Watching, so this is jumping ahead a little bit. I want to read this because this is such good stuff. Um, and she wrote a novel, I think, Save Me the Waltz, right? In her novel, Zelda, with considerable insight, equated dancing with exorcism and tried to control her wild emotions by disciplining her body. It seemed to Alabama that, reaching her goal, she would drive the devils that had driven her, that, in proving herself, she would achieve that peace which she imagined went only in surety of oneself, that she would be able, through the medium of the dance, to command her emotions. Zelda had hoped to join the Diaghilev troupe. Egorova said she was capable of secondary roles in the Messine Ballet in New York, and she was asked and refused to join the San Carlo Opera Ballet in Naples. So she actually
Okay.
did kind of like, okay, you could dance. You might not be like a prima ballerina, but you could maybe be part of a troupe.
Yeah.
But most of the emissaries who came to Egorova's studio on the top floor above the Olympia Music Hall on the Rue Camartine, this is in France, were from the Folies Bergère. They all wanted to make Zelda into an American shimmy dancer. They wanted to make her
Uh,
into like a sexy kind of pop dancer,
right,
right?
right, right.
Yeah. She could do that goofy dance that T Swift did, that weird,
Oh,
goofy
probably,
Kurt
yeah.
Chungus dance. Yeah. Yeah. Like, like Zelda, the wife in Fitzgerald's story, Two Wrongs, is bravely but hopelessly struggling to succeed against younger competition and impossible obstacles. She plunged into her work like a girl of 16, 4 hours a day at bar exercises, attitudes, sauts, arabesques, and pirouettes. It became the realest part of her life, and her only worry was whether or not she was too old. At 26, she had 10 years to make up, but she was a natural dancer with a fine body and a lovely face. And that's him writing a short story. Watching Zelda dance in 1929, the Murphys, who sympathized with her ambitions but were embarrassed by her efforts, felt she would never achieve her goal. Zelda was awkward. Her legs were too muscular. There was something about her intensity when she danced that made her look grotesque.
Mm.
The distorted legs and tortured feet in Zelda's painting Ballerinas from 1938, which evoke the suffering of a crucifixion, suggest that she was pushing her mind and body far beyond what they could bear. Looking back on the sad history of their marriage, Fitzgerald later told Sheila Graham, a woman in Hollywood, he would have, I think, kind of like the last love of his life,
Mm.
that Zelda, temperamentally unsuited to be his wife, was jealous of his success and destroyed herself by trying to compete with him.
Hmm.
Zelda and I never should have married. We were wrong for each other. She would have been happier married to almost anyone else. She was beautiful and talented. It was her tragedy that she could not bear to be overshadowed by the attention I received from my early books. For instance, she hated it when Gertrude Stein talked only to me, while her companion, Alice B. Toklas, talked to her. She had a compulsion to compete with me. She could not as a writer, so she decided to be a famous ballerina and studied with the Russian ballet in Paris, but it was too late for her. And when she realized this, instead of accepting the fact and bending with it, she broke.
Mm. Yeah, that's
Okay.
sad, man.
It is sad.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read a few more pairs from this. This gets a little more Hemingway business in, which I like. So in September 1928, after 5 months in Paris, the Fitzgeralds returned to Ellerslie in Delaware to complete their 2-year lease. In a grand gesture, Fitzgerald brought back to America a former boxer and taxi driver, Philippe, as his butler, chauffeur, sparring partner, and drinking companion. So that's the kind of life we're leading. We're like, you come, you'll be my man. You'll be my man in Ellerslie, in Delaware. Have you heard of Delaware, Philippe? It's Delaware is beautiful. Paris,
Delaware now?
Delaware, Paris has nothing on Delaware in the spring. Scott would summon Philippe from the distant kitchen with a blast from a brass automobile horn. But Zelda disliked Philippe and found him disrespectful and intimidating. Their French nanny added to the chaos by falling in love with and becoming hysterical about Philippe, whose name Fitzgerald borrowed for the hero of his Count of Darkness stories. The second stay at Ellerslie was a reprise of the first. Zelda set up a bar in front of a whorehouse mirror, played the March of the Toy Soldiers over and over and over again, and practiced dancing all day long. Madhouse.
Yeah.
Scott did very little work, took long, solitary walks, and according to his neighbors, looked lonely and miserable.
I'm just gonna go, dude. I'm just gonna go for a 4-hour walk, bro. That's just what I need to do. Honey, I'm sorry, but if I don't walk for 4 to 8 hours a day,
I'm gonna lose it. You just stay here and work on your pirouette.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt your training. Yeah.
Can you believe it's gotten this crazy? It's gotten crazy.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody. I mean, I don't think people who I had no idea it got this
I didn't.
crazy.
I kind of knew the glitz and the glamour, and that obviously it was a little bit of a front, but of that Biltmore Hotel era, he's the biggest
Plaza
name
Hotel, all that stuff.
Right,
yeah,
right, yeah. This is
cuckoo. Yeah. In November of 1928, Francis Godolphin, Hemingway's Oak Park friend, saw Ernest with Scott in New York for the Princeton-Yale football game. It's nothing like Ivy League football. Riveting. Godolphin described their comradely, it was different in that era, though, for sure. Their comradely contentment in much the same way as Booth Tarkington had portrayed them in Paris in 1925. On that particular morning, when they landed in our apartment together, they were both a bit tight and very cheerful, very pleasant, and very happy. They both seemed very harmonious, enjoying each other and having a hell of a fine time. They were at the apartment for a time, and then they went off to the cottage club and then to the game. When they returned to Ellerslie, which Hemingway found surprisingly impressive, Fitzgerald uncorked 6 bottles of expensive Burgundy just for his friend. Ernest was flattered by his generosity, but found the gesture wasteful. Content to be in Hemingway's company, Fitzgerald had behaved well all day, but he got drunk that evening and made Hemingway uncomfortable by insulting the attractive black maid who served dinner. Here we go. Heart of Darkness. Yeah. According to A.E. Hotchner, who heard the story from Hemingway, and this is whispers, right? This is a game of telephone, so what do we know? Fitzgerald, imitating what he took to be Ernest's manly swagger, exclaimed, "Aren't you the best piece of tail I ever had? Tell Mr. Hemingway." The girl never answered him and kept her composure. He must have said it to her 10 times. Tell him what a grand piece of pussy you are. Like that over and over. Hemingway felt bullfights were sedatives compared to weekends with the Fitzgeralds. Now, gross,
Yeah.
drunk, bad,
Right. Yeah.
not cool.
Boozy and he's slurring
Booze,
it, and she's
yeah,
just trying to
and
make
she's
this
just
poor
trying to
woman's
do
just
her
trying to make a living.
doing her job. Yeah,
Yeah.
gross, bad.
Yeah.
Not he's not above reproach, not at all. Not as bad as the Marquis de Sade.
No, that's true.
No,
Yeah.
but also, not
good.
great behavior. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fitzgerald redeemed himself the following month when Hemingway, traveling south on a train from New York to Florida, received a telegram announcing his father's death by suicide, which we covered on the Hemingway episode, and asking him to go west to Oak Park. Hemingway asked Fitzgerald for a $100 loan, which he delivered in person to the North Philadelphia station, and Hemingway praised him for his prompt response. You were damned good and also bloody effective to get me that money. All right. So after this period in Ellerslie ends, they take their fourth and final trip to Europe. And this is where she's going to, like, the breakdowns are going to kick off, like I read, because it all starts to kick off in Europe. All right. So let's keep going. They're back in Europe. She's taking training up to 8 hours a day, punishing her body. According to Zelda's daughter, although Scott greatly appreciated and encouraged her unusual talents and ebullient imagination, he became alarmed when her dancing became a 24-hour preoccupation, which was destroying her physical and mental health. Soon after, Zelda collapsed from physical and mental exhaustion. One evening, Scott returned home to find an exhausted Zelda seated on the floor and entranced with a pile of sand. When he asked her what she was doing, she could not speak. He summoned a French physician who examined Zelda and informed him that your wife is mad.
Jeez.
A three-quarter profile Swiss psychiatrist, Eugen Bleuler, wearing a dark suit and with a long black beard. I'm sorry, I'm just reading from the description of it. Let me get rid of that. Eugen Bleuler, one of Europe's leading psychiatrists, diagnosed Zelda as schizophrenic in November of 1930. I think Eugen Bleuler was one of Jung's teachers. Let me look him up real quick here.
I'd look it up, but I have no idea how to spell that.
Yeah, it's let me find him on Wikipedia here.
Eugen Bleuler.
I'm pulling a Joe Biden reading the description here.
Pause.
Pause. Yeah, let's find it here. Where are we? Let me see if this is the guy who taught Jung. Yeah, relationship with Freud and Jung.
Okay.
Following his interest in hypnotism, especially in its introspective variant, Bleuler became interested in Sigmund Freud's work. He favorably reviewed Joseph Breuer and Freud's studies on hysteria. And this guy was influenced by those guys.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So so this guy starts to treat her. Dude, I mean, she's sitting there staring at sand and he's like, your wife is mad. Your wife has lost her mind. Yeah.
Right.
So he diagnoses her as schizophrenic in November of 1930. And soon after her physical and mental collapse, her mental health further deteriorated. In October of 1929, during an automobile trip to Paris along the mountainous roads of the Grand Corniche, Zelda seized the car's steering wheel and tried to kill herself, her husband, and her 9-year-old daughter Scotty by driving over a cliff. So they're driving, and if you've ever been on like French roads, French mountain roads.
I've been on some mountain roads. It's not.
No, it's not good. And they're not. It's not like here where it's like there's regulations about what a road can be and and you got to pass here, and it's like, and mountain roads can be scary in America, but I've never seen anything like this. I mean, it wasn't even like a properly high mountain, but I'm just like, dude, literally, this is a 1-lane thing, and we're whipping around, and then there they come, and somehow they don't hit each other, and we're going over here, and I'm looking over the edge. It's crazy. So she pulls the wheel and she's like, fuck it, I'm done.
Oh my God.
I'm done. Yeah. So after this incident, she seeks psychiatric treatment. On April 23rd of 1930, she's admitted to a clinic. Okay. And now we've got more here. Then it's Geneva, and a doctor named Farrell gives her a tentative diagnosis of schizophrenia. but he sort of he even feared that it might even be worse. Her biographer, Nancy Milford, quotes the full diagnosis, and I'm quoting here. Oops, 1 second. Oh,
Yeah,
dude, it's worse than you would think. The more I saw Zelda, the more I thought at the time she is neither a pure neuroses nor a real psychosis. I consider her a constitutional, emotionally unbalanced psychopath. She may improve, never completely recover.
wow.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I missed a few things as I've been going along from the books, just about how uncomfortable she would make people.
Right.
Like people would hang out with them, and Fitzgerald was blind to it, or he knew, but it was like, what am I going to do about this? This is my wife, the mother of my child.
Well,
we're
and
having fun. We're partying.
He's not sober. I mean, it's not like he's sober and all put together and observe. He's right.
No,
he's got his own thing going.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
So after 5 months of observation, Bleuler, one of Europe's leading psychiatrists, confirmed Farrell's diagnosis of schizophrenia. And now later psychologists or psychiatrists say it was BPD.
Yeah.
So she gets released in 1931. And in an attempt to keep her out of an asylum, Scott hired nurses and attendants to care for her at all times. Okay, so where's the money for this coming from? Right.
Colliers.
Although just writing a wacky new story with a bunch of turns, right? Bunch of twists and turns.
Yeah.
The vampire sucks your blood. Although there were periods where her behavior was merely eccentric, she could frequently become a danger to herself and others. In one instance, she attempted to throw herself in front of a moving train, and another instance, she attacked a visiting guest at their home without provocation. Despite this, they traveled to Montgomery, where her father lay dying. After her father's death, what do you think happens? Her mental health
it doesn't get better.
It doesn't get better. No, it does not get better. Well, here, so this is some of the business about it. Many of Fitzgerald's friends, besides Dos Passos, Hemingway, and the Murphys, had observed Zelda's increasingly strange and disturbing behavior. Ellen Barry, a Riviera friend, said Zelda was thought to be outrageous, like a child, but not crazy. Morley Callahan noticed that she was extremely restless and had the unnerving habit of laughing to herself for no apparent reason. That's never good.
No.
One evening, she came down the stairs in a lovely gown, stood staring at John Biggs, stepped out of her evening slippers, and asked in indescribably ghastly tones, "John, aren't you sorry you weren't killed in the war?" And Rebecca West, an acute observer, recalled there was something very appealing about her, but frightening. Not that one was frightened from one's own point of view, only from hers. Sometimes, however, she did frighten others and put their lives in danger. And this is the business here. In September of 1929, driving on a steep and curved Grand Corniche near Cannes, Zelda suddenly exclaimed, "I think I'll turn off here," and had to be physically restrained from veering over a cliff. Unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah. Zelda's breakdown finally occurred in April of 1930 when they were living in the Rue Pergolese. Early that month, when she began to panic about being late for her dancing lessons, Oscar Kallman, who was lunching with them, offered to take her to the studio in a cab, but she remained extremely anxious, shook uncontrollably, and tried to change into her ballet costume in the narrow taxi. As they ran into a traffic jam, she leapt out of the cab and started running toward the distant studio. Fitzgerald persuaded her to stop the lessons and rest for a while, but she soon returned to them, and at the end of April of 1930 broke down completely. A few months later, as Scott and Zelda struggled to understand what had happened to them, she recounted in a poignant letter to her. He recounted to her the events that seemed to mark their mutual self-destruction. Here's what he said. "The apartments that were rotten, the maids that stank, the ballet before my eyes, spoiling the story, to take the Trubetskoys to dinner, poisoning a trip to North Africa. You were going crazy and calling it genius. I was going to ruin and calling it anything that came to hand. And I think everyone far enough away to see us outside of our glib presentation of ourselves guessed at your almost megalomaniacal selfishness and my insane indulgence in drink. Toward the end, nothing much mattered. The nearest I ever came to leaving you was when you told me you thought I was a fairy in the Rue Palatine.
Hmm.
Queer, right? I
Yeah.
wish The Beautiful and Damned had been a maturely written book because it was all true. We ruined ourselves. I never honestly thought that we ruined each other.
Hmm.
So there you go. And we're going to speed run the rest of it. But
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah, it just was not,
Jeez.
it was a
That's so,
terrible,
yeah.
so dark.
It's a folie à deux kind of, no, it's not quite that, but it certainly is a case of you can't, in an ideal situation or relationship, everybody's got their flaws, but an ideal relationship, hopefully you compensate for those flaws in yourself with strengths in your partner and vice versa, right? And this is just like it's the opposite somehow. Like
Right.
the flaws of each one is reinforced by the flaws of the other one. It's just a nightmare.
They were a perfectly horrible match.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just perfectly horrible. All right. So April 1932, they finally let her travel. He took her to lunch with Mencken, who was editing the American Mercury. Mencken, in his own diary, noted Zelda went insane in Paris a year or so ago and is still plainly more or less off her base. So throughout the
Yeah.
luncheon, she manifested signs of distress, mental distress. A year later, when Mencken met Zelda for the last time, he described her mental illness as immediately evident to any onlooker, and her
Mm.
mind is only half sane. He
Wow.
regretted Fitzgerald could not write novels as he had to write magazine stories to pay for Zelda's psychiatric treatment.
Ugh, wow.
So they go to Towson, Maryland. He's working on his next novel. Uh, Zelda would write Save Me the Waltz, and she sent it to Scribner's. I don't even know if it was published by Scribner's. It may have been. Let's see. Yeah. No, he published it in order for Fitzgerald to repay his financial debt to Scribner's.
Oh,
So
wow. Hmm.
yeah, so there you go. You can read that if you want to read that. Save Me the Waltz.
Hmm.
And I mean, we could do an episode on Zelda all our own. And
Sure.
I might at some
Yeah.
point do a Zelda episode behind the paywall. That might
Yeah.
be an idea.
Be cool.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, it could be cool, wouldn't it?
Mhm.
So Fitzgerald wasn't happy. He described Zelda as a plagiarist and a third-rate writer, um, and persuaded them to publish it, and it was a failure.
Mm.
And his own next novel, 1934, appeared as Tender is the Night. Do you know this one?
Yeah, I read it some years ago now. It's good. It's very good.
Oh yeah,
I would
yeah.
put it up there with Gatsby, but
Hmm.
it's a banger. It's rich and it's well, Gatsby had wasn't written by a man who had stared into the abyss of Zelda's insanity yet. And Tender as the Night he had, and it's evident in the work. So it's great. It's a
Right.
great novel for sure.
Yeah, it chronicles the rise and fall of Dick Diver, a
We
promising young
just got the best.
psychiatrist.
That's a
Great
ridiculous
name. This is
character
such a
name.
great, it's like a porn name for sure.
Yeah.
And his
Yeah.
wife, Nicole, who's one of his patients.
Mhm.
And so it sort of mirrors their life. Brad, I
Mhm.
put a link in there.
Yep, I
It,
got
it
it.
sold it sold 12,000 copies in
Mm,
the first 3 months.
mm.
And so it didn't do that well. And we're in the Depression era, and it's sort of like, okay, this guy, this whole jazz age thing, nobody can afford this shit.
Right.
People are dying, people are
Yeah.
starving,
Yeah. Yeah.
people
Yeah.
are, da da da. But its critical reputation has grown. So this might be like the second novel you read after Gatsby if
Yeah.
you're a Fitzgerald guy. Why don't you read us a pair or
Yeah,
two,
sure.
Brad?
Quote. On the pleasant shore of the French Riviera, about halfway between Marseille and the Italian border, stands a large, proud, rose-colored hotel. Deferential palms cool its flushed facade, and before it stretches a short, dazzling beach. Lately, it has become a summer resort of notable and fashionable people. A decade ago, it was almost deserted after its English clientele went north in April. Now, many bungalows cluster near it, but when this story begins, only the cupolas of a dozen old villas rotted like water lilies among the massed pines between Gauss's Hôtel des Étrangers and Cannes, 5 miles away. The hotel and its bright tan prayer rug of a beach were one. In the early morning, the distant image of Cannes, the pink and cream of old fortifications, the purple Alp that bounded Italy were cast across the water and lay quavering in the ripples and rings sent up by the sea plants through the clear shallows. Before 8, a man came down to the beach in a blue bathrobe and with much preliminary application to his person of the chilly water and much grunting and loud breathing, floundered a minute in the sea. When he had gone, beach and bay were quiet for an hour. Merchantmen crawled westward on the horizon. Busboys shouted in the hotel court. The dew dried upon the pines. In another hour, the horns of motors began to blow down from the winding road along the low range of the Mar, which separates the littoral from the true Provençal France. One more little para here. A mile from the sea, where pines give way to dusty poplars, is an isolated railroad stop, whence one June morning in 1925, a Victoria brought a woman and her daughter down to Goss's hotel. The mother's face was of a fading prettiness that would soon be padded with broken veins. Her expression was both tranquil and aware in a pleasant way. However, one's eye moved on quickly to her daughter, who had magic in her pink palms and her cheeks lit to a lovely flame, like the thrilling flush of children after their cold baths in the evening. Her fine forehead sloped gently up to where her hair, bordering it like an armorial shield, burst into lovelocks and waves and curlicues of ash blonde and gold. Her eyes were bright, big, clear, wet, and shining. The color of her cheeks was real, breaking close to the surface from the strong young pump of her heart. Her body hovered delicately on the last edge of childhood. She was almost 18, nearly complete, but the dew was still new on her. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I
Good.
mean, the guy could write a paragraph
Absolutely.
for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a fact about his alcoholism in the Meyers book that I think is important that I skipped over. But he had some kind of a medical condition that contributed to the way that his body processed alcohol. I can't remember the
Oh, okay.
precise. Yeah, but it wasn't a case of like, man, this guy can't hold his drink. He's just an asshole. He's like somebody who like medically should not have been drinking.
Mm-hmm.
For what it's worth, we're going to talk some
Yeah.
more about like what damage that would do. But yeah, that's another major novel.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't sell well, but by his standards. But we're well into the period of decline here.
Mm-hmm.
And got something about that. This is what Hemingway said about his talent. He wrote this in A Movable Feast. His talent was as natural as the pattern that was made by the dust on a butterfly's wings. At one time, he understood it no more than the butterfly did, and he did not know when it was brushed or marred. Later, he became conscious of his damaged wings and of their construction, and he learned to think that he could not fly anymore because the love of flight was gone, and he could only remember when it had been effortless. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pretty savage, but also very insightful.
Yeah.
So now we're in the Great Depression, and it's 1933, and the journalist criticizes his short stories, saying many Americans could no longer afford to drink champagne whenever they pleased or go on vacation to
Right.
Montparnasse in Paris. Right? You're
Right.
you're out of the zeitgeist, buddy.
Yeah.
And Bud Schulberg recalled, my generation thought of F. Scott Fitzgerald as an age rather than as a writer. And when the economic stroke of 1929 began to change the sheiks and flappers into unemployed boys or underpaid girls, we consciously and a little belligerently turned our backs on
Hmm.
Fitzgerald. All right. Um,
Yeah.
he began to suffer financially. And this is sad. Listen to this. The guy who wrote The Great Gatsby, by 1936, his book royalties amounted to $80.
Oof.
Okay. So nobody's reading him anymore. Nobody's
Right.
reading him.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, and in an alternate timeline, like he's never resuscitated. Like somebody
Yeah.
brought him
Yeah.
back. I mean, he
Yeah.
became, it was probably his influence on other writers is probably
Mhm.
what did it,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, you can imagine he's getting loans from his agent, from
Mhm.
Ober and from Perkins.
Which,
And
implies like, oh, I'm gonna write the next Gatsby. That'll be,
or the
not gonna
next This Side
happen.
of Paradise. Yeah.
Right.
And then finally his agent stops advancing him money. So he
Mm.
severs ties with his own agent
Mhm.
and he's drinking. So now his alcoholism resulted in, okay, here we go. Cardiomyopathy, coronary artery disease, angina, dyspnea, and syncopal spells. Okay.
Kind of shit I never even heard of.
Shortness of breath and then syncopal spells is arrhythmia.
Yeah.
Arrhythmia.
Okay.
He's fucking his heart up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Oof.
According to Nancy Milford, a biographer, his claims of having tuberculosis served as a pretext to cover his drinking. Scholar Ricali contends that Fitzgerald did, in fact, have recurring tuberculosis.
Hmm.
Okay, fine. So,
Possible. Yeah.
yeah, it's really not going well for him. I've got something from Hemingway and Fitzgerald here, this book that I haven't pulled from too much yet. And we'll bring this in. We'll bring this home, Brad. I know it's going long.
Oh, all right. We're doing
It's
good.
an
This is
it's an
fun, man.
it's an
It's
it's
a
an Art
good
of
story.
Darkness episode.
Yeah, it's a good story.
Yeah, I mean it's tragic, man. And again, I don't think people really have a handle on just how bad it was. Um, let's see here. Let's see. He could not treat his drinking so cavalierly after Zelda collapsed in the spring of 1930. One after another of the doctors who treated her urged Scott to give up alcohol in order to facilitate her recovery.
Hmm.
You would do that for your wife, right? Fitzgerald's letters to these doctors proved a remarkable record of the rationalization and denial symptomatic among alcoholics. Here we go. He wrote this to Dr. Farrell. My work is done on coffee, coffee, and more coffee, never on alcohol. It was on our coming to Europe in 1924, and upon her urging that I began to look forward to wine at dinner. She took it at lunch. I did not. The ballet idea was something I inaugurated in 1927 to stop her idle drinking after she had already so lost herself in it as to make suicidal attempts. 2 years ago in America, I noticed that when we stopped all drinking for 3 weeks or so, which happened many times, I immediately had dark circles under my eyes, was listless and disinclined to work. I found that a moderate amount of wine, a pint at each meal, made all the difference in how I felt. A pint of wine at each meal. Okay. Wine was almost a necessity to me to be able to stand her long monologues about ballet steps, alternating with a glazed eye toward any civilized conversation whatsoever. To stop drinking entirely for 6 months and see what happens, even to continue the experiment thereafter if successful, only a pig would refuse to do that. Give up strong drink permanently, I will. Bind myself to forswear wine forever, I cannot. The fact that I have abused liquor is something to be paid for with suffering and death, perhaps, but not with renunciation. I cannot consider one pint of wine at the day's end as anything but one of the rights of man. Classic alcoholism, too. Like you go, oh, I'll only drink beer.
Mm.
I'll only drink wine.
Yeah.
I'll only drink on Friday. I mean,
Mhm.
this is like, if you're doing those things, you might have a problem. Is there not a certain disingenuousness in her wanting me to give up all alcohol? Would not that justify her conduct completely to herself and prove to her relatives and our friends that it was my drinking that had caused this calamity and that I thereby admitted it? Okay, so basically he's saying, it was Zelda's problem, not mine. She's the reason I started drinking in the first place. And of course, none of
It was
this.
her idea. I'd never even heard of it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, none of this is true. I mean, he was an alcoholic. There's actually something that I was saving, but I'm going to read it right now. This is from the beginning of the Meyers bio. Let me get it. This is Raymond Chandler. He put this at the front. A quote from Raymond Chandler. Let's find it. Raymond Chandler wrote some good short stories, didn't he?
For sure. Yeah.
Here's what he said. Fitzgerald is a subject no one has a right to mess up. Well, sorry. Nothing but the best, nothing but the best will do for him. I think he just missed being a great writer, and the reason is pretty obvious. If the poor guy was already an alcoholic in his college days, it's a marvel that he did as well as he did. He had one of the rarest qualities in all literature. The word is charm. Charm as Keats would have used it. It's a kind of subdued magic, controlled and exquisite. All right. So, again, one of the reasons we probably have him is because he influenced so many people.
Yeah,
it reaches a point. It's like a band like Pixies, where it's like just there are too many people who matter, love this band. Now
it didn't have a lot of platinum albums, maybe, but yeah,
sure, yeah. But now check them out on Spotify and see how many plays they have.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah. In 1934, they're in Baltimore. Mencken wrote about them. The case of F. Scott Fitzgerald has become distressing.
Mm.
He's boozing in a wild manner and has become a nuisance. His wife, Zelda, who has been insane for years, is now confined at the Shepherd Pratt Hospital, and he is living in Park Avenue with his little daughter, Scotty. By 1935, alcoholism disrupted his writing and limited his mental acuity. From 1933 to 1937, he was hospitalized for alcoholism 8 times
Wow.
and jailed numerous times for fights
Wow.
and drunkenness.
Right.
This is what I mean. The 20s, and then right in 1930, she snaps, and the whole
Yeah.
zeitgeist changes, and he's getting $80 a year from royalties. Nobody's buying his books. Nobody's reading him.
Yeah. Wow.
Journalist Michael Mock of the New York Post publicly reported his alcoholism and career failure in a nationally syndicated article. The article damaged his reputation and prompted him to attempt suicide after reading it.
Ugh.
And yeah,
I don't
and I
like that.
have
This is part of the reason we do Dead People on our darkness, in my opinion.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I don't want some guy out there is past the peak and having a rough time, and you're just like pile
Mhm.
on him. Like,
Yeah, right,
yeah.
right. Well, and it's funny because the Guardian actually has this, and it says this article is more than 16 years old, and they're like,
Yeah.
this is from the New York Post, 1936. Here's a few paragraphs of it. This is from 1936. This is the piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
Long ago, when he was young, cocksure, drunk with sudden success, F. Scott Fitzgerald told a newspaper man that no one should live beyond 30. That was in 1921, shortly after his first novel, This Side of Paradise, had burst into the literary heavens like a flowering Roman candle. The poet prophet of the post-war neurotics observed his 40th birthday yesterday in his bedroom of the Grove Park Inn here. He spent the day, as he spends all his days, trying to come back from the other side of paradise, the hell of despondency in which he has writhed for the last couple of years. He had no company except his soft-spoken, southern, maternal, and indulgent nurse and this reporter. With the girl, he bantered in conventional nurse and patient fashion. With his visitor, he chatted bravely as an actor, consumed with fear that his name will never be in lights again. Discusses his next starring role. He kidded no one. There obviously was as little hope in his heart as there was sunshine in the dripping skies, covered with clouds that veiled the view of Sunset Mountain. Physically, he was suffering the aftermath of an accident 8 weeks ago when he broke his right shoulder in a dive from a 15-foot springboard. But whatever pain the fracture might still cause him, it did not account for his jittery jumping off and on to his bed, his restless pacing, his trembling hands, his twitching face with its pitiful expression of a cruelly beaten child. Nor could it be held responsible for his frequent trips to a highboy, in a drawer of which lay a bottle. Each time he poured a drink into the measuring glass on his bedside table, he would look appealingly at the nurse and ask, "Just 1 ounce?" Each time the nurse would cast down her eyes without replying. Fitzgerald, for that matter, did not attempt to make his injury an excuse for his thirst. A series of things happened to Papa, he said with mock brightness. So Papa got depressed and started drinking a little. What the things were, he refused to explain. One blow after another, he said, and finally something snapped.
Mm.
All right. And it goes on like this. And so, yeah.
Mm.
And I've got an article about his suicide attempt. I think he tried to throw himself out of the window. The Grove Park. What did he try to do? Let me see. Suicide attempts, plural,
Oh,
at the
boy.
Grove Park Inn. Yeah. There were 2 attempts at suicide. Let's see here. One was before I knew him. He had taken something, and this is from Martha Marie Shank's Recollections of Writer F. Scott Fitzgerald. Let's see here. Let's get these suicide attempts in.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
was before I knew him. He had taken something and was found lying on the bathroom floor. The second one occurred while I was seeing him, though I was not there at the time. He called and asked me to come out. And when I got there, he asked Dorothy and me to be seated. This was unusual. Then he sat down, looked serious, and said, "Dorothy, tell Martha Marie what I did." Dorothy was angry and said, "All right, I'll tell her. Scott tried to kill himself." She then went on to tell me the details of him getting a pistol and threatening to shoot himself. There was quite a commotion. All right. In some way, she got a bellboy who got the pistol, and Scott, in pajamas and bathrobe, chased him over the hotel. After that, the hotel refused to let him stay there by himself. Okay, great. That's where we are. That's where we end up in this story. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just terrible.
Yeah.
And Zelda's also in a suicidal mania. So the party's
Right.
over, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah. Oh,
the
yeah.
party,
It's better.
the
Better. It's
party's
been over
over.
for a minute.
Yeah, the party's been over for a minute. Um, so she's finally confined at the Highland Hospital in Asheville, North Carolina. He is nearly bankrupt. And after all this, and he's living in cheap hotels, and he's still writing. And he referred this period of his life as the crack up in a short story.
Mm.
His mother suddenly dies, and their marriage is just like gone. He would finally see Zelda for the last time on a 1939 trip to Cuba. And during this trip, they're at a cockfight. He tries to intervene against animal cruelty, and he gets beaten up again.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
And then
Right.
he's hospitalized in Manhattan. But what happens? And this happened a few years before the incident in Cuba.
Hmm.
He gets an offer from MGM in 1937. Okay. And
He still got it.
I still got it, baby.
Yeah.
And so he lived for the next 2 years, he rented a cheap room on Sunset Boulevard. Can you believe it? Sunset. He goes to Sunset Boulevard, the Garden of Allah bungalow and Sunset Boulevard. That's where our hero ends up. And he would drink, I think like 40 Coca-Colas a day to abstain from alcohol. It's common among alcoholics to like go to sweets. You go to like cigarettes or sweets, people do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But like 40 Coca-Colas, that's too much Coca-Cola. Dude.
I mean, that's only marginally more healthy for you than drinking alcohol.
Right. You might as well. Yeah. Like the Russians who are having like a little like a bit of vodka, they're probably doing better than you. Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
It's disgusting, to be honest.
That's repulsive.
Yeah. All right. I'm just, yeah. All right. Yeah. So he goes, and he's paying for Zelda's treatment and Scotty's education. He's still in debt. He's working as a screenwriter for MGM. I think he may have had one movie made and there was some uncredited stuff, but he would like punch up a script. I mean, he was like a contract screenwriter, right?
Yeah.
He would have a relationship with Sheila Graham, who came up earlier. She was a gossip columnist. And I mean, Zelda's long gone. They're married on paper, but
right.
And so you sort of can't blame him. And he's struggling with alcoholism and depression. So let's read about this. I got some pages. Oh,
I feel like getting into a relationship with a gossip columnist is a bad idea.
Yeah, but it's so Fitzgerald, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing to do.
Yeah.
Scott arrived in Hollywood during July of 1937. He was grateful for the lucrative MGM contract Ober had negotiated. So his agent, reconnects with him and comes through. Good job. Right. Hey, there you go. This is the guy who wrote The Great Gatsby. We got to take care of our boy. Come on.
Yeah.
You can't let the bros have nothing.
Right.
$1,000 a week for 6 months, with an extension in January of 1938 if all went well, for a second year at $1,250 weekly. Pretty lucrative. He judiciously budgeted a monthly allowance for Scotty and $30 a week for Zelda, but sent more whenever he could. Aware he had to be careful about studio politics, he wrote Scotty, "I must be very tactful, but keep my hand on the wheel from the start. Find out the key man among bosses and the most malleable among the collaborators. Then fight the rest tooth and nail until, in fact or in effect, I'm alone on the picture. That's the only way I can do my best work. Given a break, I can make them double this contract in less than 2 years." Mm-hmm. He was determined to, still megalomaniacal, right? I got to be the man on the picture.
I can understand wanting to do you need to double it? Or can you just try to do a decent job for a while?
Yeah, I mean, after everything he's been through, he's not going to be like workmanlike, and
right.
He's got to win. He's got to win. Yeah. A few more paras here about this period. He was determined to avoid alcohol and shunned heavy drinkers. When he ran into Dorothy Parker and Robert Benchley at the studio, they were dumbfounded by his refusal to roam the bars with them. Scott Fitzgerald is on the wagon.
Right.
As Scott took on the mantle of a reformed drunk, he became almost evangelistic in his determination to remain sober. That's always fun. People love that. I mean,
Mhm.
good for him.
You should drink a Coca-Cola. You should drink a refreshing Coca-Cola.
You should have 10 Coca-Colas before lunch. It works
I
for
know some
me.
people like alcohol. I know some people like a gin and tonic, but me, I enjoy a Coca-Cola.
Yeah, so he's sharing a unit with screenwriter Eddie Meyer. He's trying to save finally.
Hmm.
He bought an old Ford coupe so he could easily commute to MGM. When he reported for his first full day of work, he was asked to polish the script of A Yank at Oxford, starring Robert Taylor, an easy assignment given the volume of material he had written about Princeton. Even so, he had difficulty getting to work. Trying to avoid distractions, he ignored most of the other writers in his building, talking only to those he already knew: Anita Luce, Dorothy Parker, and Ogden Nash. He rarely ate in the commissary, preferred to sit alone at his desk, drinking Cokes and chain smoking filtered Raleighs. If anyone entered his office uninvited, he complained of the interruption. Such unsociability was interpreted as arrogance, provoking other writers to undermine him and talk behind his back. He became even more reclusive after seeing Hemingway again at the home of Frederick March and Florence Eldridge. Scott had been invited there for a screening of Spanish Earth, with which Ernest had written with Lillian Hellman, Archibald MacLeish, and Joris Ivans, the kind of I think propaganda film about the
Right, right.
the Civil War. Um, Afterwards, Hemingway made an impassioned plea for donations to buy ambulances for Spain, and the highly successful fundraiser took in $17,000. But when the party moved on to Dorothy Parker's place, Fitzgerald declined to attend until Lillian Hellman changed his mind. He knew he might have to speak with Ernest there and was embarrassed. Fitzgerald still considered Hemingway the best living writer in the English language and knew Ernest condemned him for betraying his writing gift and had said so to Maxwell Perkins. Scott has so much lousy talent, and he has suffered so without knowing why, has destroyed himself so, and destroyed Zelda, though never as much as she has tried to destroy him.
Hmm.
He also remained sensitive about Hemingway's disdain for Zelda. Always convinced that Scott's downfall was Zelda's fault, Ernest had written Perkins, Scott should have traded Zelda in 5 or 6 years ago before she was certifiably crazy.
Wow.
Arriving at Parker's house, he avoided Ernest the whole evening by staying in the kitchen and talking with the hostess, Lillian Hellman, and Dashiell Hammett. The next morning, he telegraphed Ernest, the picture was beyond praise, and so was your attitude. But in his notebook, he admitted their friendship was finally over, writing, I talk with the authority of failure, Ernest with the authority of success. We could never sit across the table again.
Hmm.
Oh, it's so sad.
It is really
Oh,
sad.
so sad.
Yeah.
Got a little more here, almost done. I got another sad story. Are we sad enough yet? I'm actually getting sad. This is
Yeah,
such a sad story.
it is.
This is one of the reasons this was kind of hard to prep, is that it's just so tragic. And
Yeah.
the deeper I got into it and the more I got into the 30s, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a nightmare. Um, all right, let's see here. I want to make sure I get this right. What pages are we on? Yeah, here it is. Estranged from Zelda, Fitzgerald attempted to reunite with Ginevra King. Okay. She
Not a good
visits
idea.
Hollywood in 1938. I think she reached out to him. Yeah,
Oh,
here it
okay.
is. Completely unexpectedly, he received a telegram from Ginevra King. He had not seen her in 2 decades and had
Hmm.
spoken to her only once in 1933 when he had telephoned to ask if she would entertain Zelda at the World's Fair, which she did in Chicago.
Hmm.
Aside from that, there had been no contact. Ginevra was now a recent divorcee, and since she was planning to visit Santa Barbara, suggested their meeting. But Fitzgerald was anxious about seeing her again and expressed his reservations to Scotty, to his daughter. She was the first girl I ever loved, and I faithfully avoided seeing her up to this moment to keep that illusion perfect, because she ended up by throwing me over with the most supreme boredom and indifference. I don't know whether I should go or not. It would be very, very strange. In the end, he decided to see her, and they met in Hollywood for lunch. Fitzgerald arrived nervous and quickly ordered a series of double Tom Collinses. Though the
Hmm.
reunion was obscured by an alcoholic haze, Scott still found Ginevra attractive and called her repeatedly over the next several days. Then, as suddenly as she had dumped him years before, he abruptly let it drop.
Hmm.
The consequences of the reunion were disastrous. Seeing Ginevra again unsettled Fitzgerald and threw him violently off the wagon. After getting drunk at a bar on Santa Monica Boulevard, he picked a fight and wound up at the Georgia Street Receiving Hospital in downtown LA. The first incident was followed by numerous others, including several abusive encounters with Graham, in which Scott humiliated her in front of people, hit her, and threatened to kill himself.
Jeez.
When she temporarily ended, and this is a gossip columnist.
Right.
Oof, yeah. When she temporarily ended their relationship, Fitzgerald claimed it was for the best, acknowledging he was in no condition for an emotional involvement. People are either good for each other or not, and obviously I am horrible for you. I loved you with everything I had, but something was terribly wrong. You don't have to look far for the reason. I was not fit for any human relation. His professional life was coming apart. The intrigues of Hollywood politics confused Scott, who was a novice at studio games. I don't know how this job is going, he wrote Zelda. Things depend on such hairlines here. One must not only do a thing well, but do it as a compromise, sometime between utterly opposed ideas of two differing executives. The diplomatic part in business is my weak spot. He doesn't belong as a studio.
No.
So you see, he took this because he needs the money, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Faulkner did much the same thing. We talked about that in our Faulkner episode, and I think Faulkner left in 36, so he might have been there before Fitzgerald, but a similar kind of story. Drunk and can't figure out the politics and falls into a love affair that's maybe ill-advised, maybe not, all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and all this in like LA sunshine and the beach. Right. I mean, yeah. So he's with Sheila Graham. He has a heart attack at Schwab's pharmacy. His doctor says you got to avoid strenuous exertion. He had climbed two flights of stairs to his apartment.
40-something-year-old man climbs 2 flights of stairs, heart attack.
Yeah, has a heart attack. Yeah, hard living, man. It's all that Coca-Cola, all those years of alcohol, and these chain smoking cigarettes. Not good. Yeah. So Graham lives on the ground floor. So he moves in with her in North Hollywood Avenue, 1 block east of his apartment on North Laurel. And throughout their relationship, Graham claimed Fitzgerald felt constant guilt over Zelda's mental illness and confinement. He repeatedly attempted sobriety, had depression, had violent outbursts, and attempted suicide. On occasions that Fitzgerald failed his attempt at sobriety, he would ask strangers, "I'm F. Scott Fitzgerald. You've read my books. You've read The Great Gatsby, haven't you? Remember?" As Graham had read none of his works, Fitzgerald attempted to buy her a set of his novels. After visiting several bookstores, he realized they had stopped carrying his works. The realization that he was largely forgotten as an author further depressed him. All right, so he's screenwriting. He revised the film Madame Curie. He did a dialogue polish for Gone with the Wind that wasn't unused, or that went unused. He called the original an old wives' tale, uncredited. His only screenplay credit was on a film called Three Comrades, a 1938 film. It's a drama screenplay by F. Scott Fitzgerald, adapted from the novel Three Comrades by Eric Maria Remarque. Tells the story of the friendship of 3 young German soldiers following World War I. Okay. So now he's writing about the war. So can you really write about the war? All right.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, to the studio's annoyance, he ignored script writing rules and included descriptions more fitting for a novel.
Sure.
So, of course he did. Right. Yeah. And so he's working on his 5th novel, which I think he wouldn't finish, but which would finally be published, called The Last Tycoon, which is based on a film executive, Irving Thalberg. In 1939, they terminated his contract, and now he's a freelance screenwriter.
Oh, boy.
He has a relapse during work on a film called Winter Carnival, and he would get treatment by a psychiatrist. Billy Wilder, the director, described his foray into Hollywood Fitzgerald's as like that of a great sculptor who is hired to do a plumbing job. Others suggested that Hollywood sucked his creativity like a vampire, which that's been a motif.
Right. Make sure they could have used that energy to make Vampire Sopranos.
Yeah, they could have made the Vampire Soprano series. I mean,
free idea again.
Prestige TV.
Once again, listening to Art of Darkness, you can get so many project ideas. Vampire
Absolutely.
Sopranos, for instance.
Vampire Supreme. And the Marquis de Sade is a vampire.
Yeah,
And
yeah. And
he's
still
out
alive.
to get
Yeah,
his fuck.
yeah. And he's like, but he's like he's like a
But he's like a
mafioso.
mafioso. Yeah, he's very
Yeah,
powerful.
right.
And
In Delaware.
every in and they solve mysteries.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like it.
Cool. Yeah, we got so many good ideas. How many now but one number 1 through 100, Brad, how many beers was Fitzgerald drinking in 1939 a day?
Okay, well, it's okay. So it was 40 Cokes a day, right?
Roughly. Yeah.
Roughly. It's
Yeah.
got to be in that same ballpark. So it's got to be, I'm going to, it's got to be a minimum of a case of 24 beers. A minimum of 24 beers.
40. He drank
Dang.
nearly 40 beers a day.
Oh God, that's too many.
That's too many damn beers, man. 120 days of Sodom, too
Yeah,
much Sodom.
too much.
40
40
beers,
beers a day.
too many beers. I don't care if they're 3-2. I don't care if they're
No. It doesn't matter at that
it
point.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're Dos Equis or
But
IPAs. 40 IPAs a day, you die. You die in one
you
day.
can't do that.
Bro.
Yeah,
Your beard grows too thick and you choke on your own beard.
right.
After 40
right.
tasty local IPAs.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. He died of Reddit.
The
He died of
hangover
Reddit.
of the hanger of over 40 beers must just
yeah, brutal,
Yeah.
dude. Yep. So there you go. He would mock himself as a Hollywood hack in a sequence of 17 stories, and he's approaching the end here. He wrote to his daughter, "I wish now I'd never relaxed or looked back, but said at the end of The Great Gatsby, I found my line. From now on, this comes first. This is my immediate duty. Without this, I am nothing."
Mm-hmm.
And I've got an excerpt from The Last Tycoon for you to read, Brad, and this will be the last thing I ask you to read. Let me put this in the El Chatterino. I hope everybody's had a good time. We go long on Art of Darkness. We go hard on Art of Darkness. We love doing this podcast. We want your support. Think about hitting us up on Patreon or Substack, patreon.com/artofdarkpod, substack.com/@artofdarkpod. I got some good stuff coming up on the After Dark. That'll probably go minimum 30 minutes, probably closer to an hour. And this one for me was important. This is big air in my, this is like local flavor. I live in beautiful St. Paul, Minnesota. And F. Scott Fitzgerald is important to me as a writer and obviously a local figure. So we got good stuff coming up too, man. I'm supposed to prepare Wagner next.
Oh yeah.
Max Wagner.
That's intense.
That's going to be intense. Yeah, I'll see how far I get. We'll see. And then we're doing Shakespeare, man. That's coming up.
Yep.
I mean,
so
we're rocking and rolling. And
the hits keep coming.
The hits keep coming from Art of Darkness. And listen, you do not want to sleep on Brad's banger. Marquis de Sade episode. I'm sorry. After 4+ hours of this, you start to get a little loopy.
It is interesting how that stuff just starts not firing anymore.
Yeah. And I'm so many hours away from coffee, and I do not drink 40 Cokes a day, so much less 40 beers a day. Be a different podcast if I drank 40 beers before doing this, or while doing this. That's a lot of beers, dude. That's a few too many beers.
That's just you get into like where's even the time? Like
right.
Just drink 40 12-ounce volumes of anything in a day. You got to like work at it. Like
absolutely.
Yeah.
This is a full-time job. Yeah. So The Last Tycoon, it was unpublished. Okay. In 1941, it would be published posthumously. And it is about the life of Hollywood studio manager Monroe Starr, clearly based on Irving Thalberg, who was in charge of production at MGM, whom Fitzgerald had encountered several times. And the novel begins with young Bennington College student Cecilia Brady, the daughter of influential Hollywood producer Pat Brady, preparing to fly home from the East Coast to LA. All right, okay. Brad, read us a little bit of this.
Yeah. Quote, though I haven't ever been on the screen, I was brought up in pictures. Rudolph Valentino came to my 5th birthday party, or so I was told. I put this down only to indicate that even before the age of reason, I was in a position to watch the wheels go round. I was going to write my memoirs once, The Producer's Daughter, but at 18, you never quite get around to anything like that. It's just as well. It would have been as flat as an old column of Lolly Parsons. My father was in the picture businesses. Another man might be in cotton or steel, and I took it tranquilly. At the worst, I accepted Hollywood with the resignation of a ghost assigned to a haunted house. I knew what you were supposed to think about it, but I was obstinately unhorrified. This is easy to say, but harder to make people understand. When I was at Bennington, some of the English teachers who pretended an indifference to Hollywood or its products really hated it way down deep as a threat to their existence. Even before that, when I was in a convent, a sweet little nun asked me to get her a script of a screenplay so she could, quote, teach her class about movie writing, as she had taught them about the essay and the short story. I got the script for her, and I suppose she puzzled over it and puzzled over it, but it was never mentioned in class, and she gave it back to me with an air of offended surprise and not a single comment. That's what I half expect to happen to this story. You can take Hollywood for granted like I did, or you can dismiss it with the contempt we reserve for what we don't understand. It can be understood too, but only dimly and in flashes. Not half a dozen men have ever been able to keep the whole equation of pictures in their heads, and perhaps the closest a woman can come to the setup is to try and understand one of these men. Yeah,
All
cool.
right. So she's writing, yeah, from the perspective of a young woman. Very interesting. And
Yeah, yeah.
it's you know, it's tragic. This is what he's doing at the end of his life. He's trying to write.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
let's see here. How is it received?
It's still got some energy and some swagger, but we don't see the like the stark Fitz the not stark, the powerful Fitzgeraldian imagery, the sort of expressionism of like, putting you in a place. It's more sort of talky,
Hmm.
which isn't
Yeah.
necessarily bad, but it does feel like maybe there isn't quite as much horsepower behind this.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There's a version of this in 1993 that was reworked by Broccoli, the Fitzgerald scholar, saying he reworked the 17 chapters and the 31 planned according to his interpretation of the notes.
Oh.
And at least one reviewer considered it to be a work of a remarkable feat of scholarship. Okay.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is definitely an unfinished novel for
Right.
sure.
Right.
Okay. But, because it's Fitzgerald, it's important.
Yeah.
All right. Home stretch.
Go ahead.
He achieved sobriety over a year before his death, and Graham described their last year together as one of the happiest times of their relationship. So, okay, no more hitting, no more drunk Scotty. On the night of December 20th, 1940, they attended the premiere of This Thing Called Love. They left the Pantages Theater. He experiences a dizzy spell and is having a hard time walking to the car. He would say to Graham, I suppose people will think I'm drunk. Failed projects and a return to heavy drinking marked his last years in Hollywood. In a series of short stories, we already talked about this. He mocked his own sort of character, and his relapses were legendary. And let me get to the end. This is the end. My only friend, the end. Let's see here. All right. I got this. Yeah, I'm going to read quite a bit here, so buckle up.
Right now.
Fitzgerald's his work in the novel was also delayed by bad health. After the trip to Cuba in 1939, a lesion was discovered in one of his lungs, and he had to spend the next 2 months in bed. In July, he told Scotty that he not only had a flare-up of tuberculosis, but he had also suffered a nervous breakdown and that threatened to paralyze both arms. In fact, his arms got twisted in his bedclothes when he was drunk, and his doctors, to scare him away from alcohol, threatened him with paralysis. If you don't stop drinking, you're going to be paralyzed.
I'm going to paralyze you. Yeah.
He was overcome by another imaginary illness in March of 1940 when he was again flying across the country. He suddenly felt terribly sick, panicked, and rather grandly asked the airline stewardess to wire for a doctor, nurse, and ambulance to meet him at Tucson Airport. By the time they landed, Fitzgerald had miraculously recovered and decided to remain on the plane. When pressed for payment by the Lusk Detective and Collection Agency, B.A. Budd, attorney at law, and Bring's funeral home, he candidly replied, "You can't get blood out of a stone." But he took the precaution of telling Perkins not to disclose his private address. This is some lowdown shit. This is some like
Yeah.
Bukowski stuff. You don't expect this from Fitzgerald.
No, no.
The claimant is of all things an undertaker, Scott explained. Not that I owe him for a corpse, but for an ambulance, which he claims that I ordered. In any case, he now writes me threatening to serve me with a summons and a complaint. Perkins was also instructed to say that he did not know if his wayward author was in New Orleans or at the North Pole. But his illness was not entirely fanciful. Like Monroe's star, he was perilously close to ambulances and funeral homes. When the playwright Clifford Odets saw him at Dorothy Parker's cocktail party in September 1940, he apprehensively noted Fitzgerald pale and healthy, as if the tension of life had been wrenched out of him. Scott was taking potentially lethal doses of barbiturates and 48 drops of digitalis to keep his heart working overnight. But his medicine did not do much good. In late November 1940, he had his first heart attack at Schwab's grocery store, or at drugstore. He almost fainted and said that everything started to fade. And we've already covered this. And we have this business with the film. We've covered that. And let's see here. All right. So he moves to her first floor apartment and settles into a sickbed routine, writing whenever he could. He told the California tax commissioner, who also failed to extract money from him, "Life is one cardiogram after another, which is a pleasant change from x-rays." In October 1940, remembering his father's heart disease and wondering if he was near the finish line, Scott had bravely told Zelda, "The Constitution is an amazing thing, and nothing quite kills it until the heart has run its entire race."
Hmm.
On December 20th, after seeing a film with Sheila, he had a second heart attack and just managed, with her help, to stagger out of the theater. The following day, Saturday, December 21st, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he suffered his third and this time fatal heart attack at her apartment. He's sitting in a green armchair, finishing a chocolate bar and making notes on an article in the Princeton Alumni Weekly, an analytical long-range view of the 1940 football team. Suddenly, he started out of his chair as if jerked by a wire, clutched at the mantelpiece, and fell silently to the floor. He lay on his back, breathing heavily. Sheila summoned medical help, which arrived too late to save him. Like Robert Louis Stevenson and D.H. Lawrence, Fitzgerald died at the age of 44.
Wow.
His body was taken to the Wordsworth Room of Pierce Brothers Mortuary at 720 West Washington Boulevard in a seedy, there's that word again, part of downtown L.A. Defaced by a cosmetic mortician, he had highly rouged cheeks and looked like a badly painted portrait. One of the few visitors recalled, "Except for one bouquet of flowers and a few empty chairs, there was nothing to keep him company except his casket. I never saw a sadder scene than the end of the father of all the sad young men. He was laid out to look like a cross between a floor walker and a wax dummy, but in technicolor. His hands were horribly wrinkled and thin, the only proof left after death that for all the props of youth, he had actually suffered and died an old man." When Fitzgerald heard of the death of his literary master, Conrad, he had stood on a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean and mournfully repeated, "Conrad is dead." When Dorothy Parker saw Fitzgerald in the LA funeral home, she ironically quoted Owl Eye's comment on Jay Gatsby and said, "The poor son of a bitch."
Yeah, you can count on Dorothy Parker, man. That's yeah. Oh, jeez.
I'm gonna say one more thing, but that finally principally is the life of F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's sad, man, because there's nobody more talented. There's just people who are differently talented, right? Man.
You got to read. You have to read that word "great" in The Great Gatsby with all of the bitterness and irony and sad tragedy of the novel on its own face. And then I think if you have the biography of F. Scott Fitzgerald, or at least a sketch of it, which I've tried to give, Put all of what I've just done and all of the tragedy of his life and throw that into the word great.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I really think that's what he means by that title and that
Yeah.
novel, you know? And
Yeah.
I think he maybe knew he was going to end up some way like this.
Probably. Yeah. Probably at some point he knew, right? At some point it was pretty clear. Yeah. Oh. Oh
Can we
man.
get much higher all the way
All the way down.
almost into the gutter?
Right. 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 If it wouldn't have been for that MGM, the Hollywood thing, he would have. I mean, that seemed like that just kind of kept him afloat for a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very wild. Huh.
I'm going to read a few more paragraphs and then talk about kind of the final resting place and tease the Patreon. Then we'll come back
Yeah.
for After Dark, and where we're going to talk about some more stuff. All right, and then I got to ask the closing question too. But
Sure. Yeah.
so on learning of her father's death, Scotty telephoned Graham from Vassar, where she was going to college, and asked she not attend the funeral for social propriety. So she said, "Please, you can't attend," to
Hmm.
Graham. So that's also sad. In
Yeah.
Graham's
Yeah.
place, her friend Dorothy Parker attended the visitation held in the back room, which we just said.
Mhm.
Uh, when his poorly embalmed corpse arrived in Bethesda, Maryland, only 30 people attended his funeral. Scotty, Ober, Perkins were there. Zelda eulogized him in a letter to a friend. He was as spiritually generous a soul as ever was. It seems as if he was always planning happiness for Scotty and me, books to read, places to go. Life seemed so promising always when he was around. Scott was the best friend a person could have to me. At the time of his death, the Roman Catholic Church, the One True Faith, denied the family's request that Fitzgerald, a non-practicing Catholic, be buried in the family plot in the Catholic St. Mary's Cemetery in Rockville, Maryland. Fitzgerald was buried instead with a simple Protestant service at Rockville Cemetery. Uh, Zelda, I don't want to talk about this more in the After Dark, but I got to mention this to get it in. She would die in Highland Hospital. I think it's in North Carolina, uh, in 1948, trapped in a fire
Ooh.
in a mental hospital.
Oh
That's how she
God.
would come to an end.
That's terrible. That's terrible.
Dude, I mean, the
Oh,
jazz age is over. Did the
yeah.
jazz age ever even happen? Was any of this real? Was it
Right.
just a creation of Madison Avenue in the magazines? Was it
Yeah,
all a lie?
just a couple nights out, one or two clubs, was that, yeah, right.
Yeah. Did any of it really happen? Did any
Right,
of it happen?
right.
Because the end certainly, and if it did happen, did you have to pay for it? Did you
Yeah,
pay for it with some sort of karmic hell?
yeah,
Did you
yeah.
party too hard? Can you party too hard? You can
You
party too
can. Oh
hard.
yeah,
You
you
can
can
party
definitely
too
party
hard.
too hard.
I know we tried. We tried in our time. We've tried in our time.
Yeah,
You can party too
yeah,
hard.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for
you can
sure.
catch it. But
Yeah.
she'd be buried by him, with him in 1948.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
of course, finally, his legacy would be reevaluated. And they they would, I believe, eventually be um, reinterred. So they rested in peace for 27 years. This is from Medium. The Coffeelicious. In
Okay.
1975, civic groups wanted to spruce up the grave and contacted Scotty. By then, she had married and was living in Washington, D.C. Wanting to make things right, she successfully sought to have her parents reinterred in the family plot at St. Mary's Church.
Oh,
So
okay.
now he rests off Veers Mill Road in a historic area of Rockville. That's, I think, Maryland. Is that Rockville, Maryland?
Sounds like Maryland, yeah.
Rockville, Maryland, Fitzgerald. I want to get it right, Brad. I want to get it right.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, F. Scott Fitzgerald Theater, Rockville, Maryland, for sure.
Hmm.
Surrounded by traffic, shopping centers, and office buildings.
Hmm.
Nobody's having even remotely as much fun as he had.
Right.
Nobody. We're going to Chipotle
Yep.
and
Yep.
lament. Nobody will ever remember pre-COVID Chipotle.
Oh man, I just
Uh,
imagine somebody getting
and
their
ate.
Chipotle and walking out, and you got the
Uh,
24-ounce dude. Or like, hey, that's F. Scott Fitzgerald. Who? Ah,
who?
never mind. Yeah. Back to the office.
Absolutely.
Back to the office
Absolutely.
building.
Back to the office with my extra meat Chipotle with avocado. It was only $22.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah. And I got a large Coca-Cola.
Wow, that's great. That's a good
I
deal.
got the app, so I got the large Coca-Cola free.
It's a good deal. Oh,
Great
oh,
deal.
oh.
Yeah. So he's there with his wife and daughter, his ancestors, the Scotts, the Keys, and the Fitzgeralds.
Hmm.
And apparently visitors leave pens and bottles of liquor,
Okay. Well,
ironically.
yeah.
And the grave, and this is unavoidable, but
if I go there, I'm leaving a can of Coca-Cola.
yeah, leave a can of Coke and the big book from AA.
There
I
you go.
think
There you go.
leave
Yeah.
him leave him his 1 day chip.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
You got one day, Scotty.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is inscribed with, on the grave?
Well, I couldn't quote it, but I'm sure they've put something. They should put something from Gatsby. If you're a great writer and you die, it should be one of your great lines apropos to this context should be on your gravestone.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
so we beat on boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you
yeah.
write a banger line like that, it becomes a cliche, but at the same time,
It's good.
it's
Great.
your line, and you wrote a banger. You wrote a banger novel, maybe the greatest American novel, certainly one of the greatest in American novels. At that level, it becomes, hey, you, Faulkner, Hemingway, and some other very rare authors at
Mhm.
at that height. Okay. We're going to talk on the After Dark about Fitzgerald and Hemingway. We're going to talk more about his alcoholism. I got this funny article about the bedroom quirks of famous authors. We didn't talk
Okay.
about him being a foot guy at all on this episode,
Yeah,
but I think
yeah.
we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to talk about Zelda and her decline,
Hmm.
her horrific death. And then I got this business about Poe and Fitzgerald. It's going to be a lot. It's probably going to be 30, 45 minutes. If you want that, you got to support the pod, artofdarkpod.com. Hopefully in your generous heart, you don't want to see Brad and I end up in Hollywood writing vampire schlock. We want to keep doing this.
No, if the
independent
price is right.
Hey, listen again. Brad and I will write vampire schlock for you. We'll write you Vampire Sopranos. That's what it'll be called.
Yeah.
It'll be called the
Yeah.
Vampire Sopranos.
Yeah, and it'll be the
And-
best damn vampire mafioso TV show you've ever seen.
Procedural, whatever you want. In fact, where Brad and I will fly private. We'll fly coach too.
Yeah,
Whatever,
yeah.
and old Pulp and Slick are there for you. We're ready
Yeah.
we're hired hands. We'll do whatever you want. Hollywood executives, streaming service executives.
You
But
hear
Brad,
that? Hear
yeah,
that? Anything.
anything. We can write about the Marquis de Sade. We can write about Fitzgerald's small
Yeah.
dick.
Yeah.
Whatever
Yeah.
you want, old
Yeah.
Pulp and Slick, we're ready for you. Brad, what would Fitzgerald be doing today?
I hate to say it, but I don't know if he ever really gets. Maybe he does. It seemed like, I guess, in that last year, maybe if he got a relationship with a woman like this, Graham seemed like she may have been, and was able to sort of get some stability in the old career arena. Maybe he could have finally gotten himself back from the booze completely. I feel like, and this isn't a knock against Zelda. I'm not trying to turn this into like all of his problems are Zelda's fault, but maybe if he got long enough, far enough away from Zelda for a long enough time, maybe he could have righted the ship and given us one last glorious, incredible novel. What do you think?
I think it's a question of like, does he ever manage to get sober?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know?
Yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah.
if he does, it's a totally different story.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he was not sober when he wrote Gatsby. It seemed that he was waking up to the fact that he should have devoted himself entirely to the novel. So it's nice to think that and this question is always a little goofy, right? Because do we
Mhm.
get him now in his prime? Because
Right.
I think right now, if we threw him into the present in his prime, he maybe writes a great novel about
Mhm.
the internet or about, internet culture or youth called the Zoomers. He might write a novel about TikTok or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something that, but then, if he falls into addiction, he gets like an Adderall addiction.
Yeah.
or he gets, he's drinking alcohol and he's doing ketamine or something now,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And then what ends up happening to him in this world? Well, he probably ends up writing for some streaming garbage, right? Or he
Yeah.
becomes like an influencer. Zelda becomes an influencer on TikTok, and they just like destroy
Right.
their lives
Right. And he's like
in a
the
different
writer
way.
boyfriend. He's like the writer boyfriend, but nothing really comes of it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
or he has one big hit novel and whatever that means in today's currency,
Right.
and and then dissipates. I mean,
Right.
but I feel like he was, like Hemingway said, he's a natural writer. I mean, he's just
Mhm.
such an obviously natural, gifted writer.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
Saint, the Minnesota's greatest writer, maybe the greatest Saint Paulite to ever live,
Mhm.
in terms of art and artistic impact. And
Mhm.
it takes a lot to break through out here, and he did, it, and he lived a big life. And there's that funny thing that happens when you define yourself by like being so big in the zeitgeist, like I am the 20s, right? It's
Right.
like Madonna, I am the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
just sort of like, then that weird psychological thing happens where a decade turns over and it's like
Yeah.
our decade is gone. What is
Right.
left? What is left for
Yeah. And
us?
we're like still alive. Right. Or
Yeah.
now what do we
Yeah.
do? Yeah.
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 And we were on the top of the world, but now we've fallen out of fashion. How painful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
Amen.
all right, man. Well, I hope that was good. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everybody else
Absolutely.
enjoyed it. We love doing these core episodes. We got a lot more coming. Stick around. Subscribe to the Patreon. Subscribe to the Substack if you care to. They're equal. They're both the same. You only need
Hmm.
one. They get it the same exact stuff. We got book club
Yep.
coming up on Sunday. We're doing Hamlet.
Saturday. Saturday.
Oh shit! Sorry,
Yeah.
Saturday. Oh man,
Yeah.
I'm so tired. Let me actually read the date and time. Well, actually, you know what? I'll do that because that's for Patreon. But it's coming
Yeah.
up on Saturday, 1 p.m. Watch the Branagh version. Join us in the Zoom if you care to, or listen back if you are a patron. Any other any last words, Brad?
No, I don't think so. Just to
Well, you
everybody out
gotta,
there, try to if you're a single person out there and you're out there in the dating pool, just consider, is this a Zelda? Or consider the opposite. Is this an F. Scott Fitzgerald character? Yeah. Yeah.
gotta. I hate saying this, but if you gotta try to marry well,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
means different things to different people. It doesn't just mean hey, marry money, though. Sometimes
Right.
that's a factor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Try not to get into one of the most horrible marriages that's ever happened.
Yeah.
And also everybody,
Ask yourself, with this person, can I become, this is the cheesiest hell, but can I become the best person I could be with this person? Will they help that, or are they going to make that harder? That's
am
a
I
good
going to
question
end
to
up
ask.
in the gutter? Am I going to
Right.
end up dead?
Yeah.
Or like, how many, if here's the metric. We're going to call
Mm.
this the Fitzgerald from now on. If I marry this person, how many great American novels will their mental illness and our combination of
Hmm.
mental illness and
Hmm.
problems, how many great American novels will it destroy?
Mm.
Because one is too many.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Agreed.
Okay, I'm going to go pound 40 Cokes. We'll be back on the After Dark.